Hey friends! Glad you're here at Fanfic Adventure. We've cooked up something special. What if Naruto received a Devil Grimoire and used anti-magic to nullify every ninjutsu in the Chunin Exams? Liking and subscribing really helps us out. Okay, story time. Chapter 1, The Black Pages. The mission was supposed to be simple. Escort a merchant named Tezuro Hen to a trading post 2 days east of Konoha, collect the payment, come home. C rank at best. The kind of job Kakashi accepted with one eye still on his book, the kind Sasuke considered beneath him, and the kind Naruto complained about loudly for the first hour before getting distracted by a butterfly and forgetting he was supposed to be complaining. The problem started on the second day. Tezuro was a small, nervous man who sweated even in cool weather and had a habit of looking over his shoulder every few minutes. Naruto had noticed it early but assumed the guy was just paranoid. Lots of civilians got twitchy around Shinobi, like they weren't sure if their escorts would protect them or rob them first. But somewhere around midday on the second day, Tezuro started looking over his shoulder and checking his compass, which meant he wasn't watching for threats. He was watching for something specific. "Hey," Naruto said, falling into step beside him. "You okay?" "Fine, fine." Tezuro dabbed at his forehead with a cloth that was already soaked through. "Just eager to reach the post." "The post is north. You keep looking east." Tezuro's eyes went wide for just a second before the nervous smile came back. Force of habit. Naruto looked at Kakashi, who was reading his book 3 meters ahead with his back to both of them. Without looking up, Kakashi turned a page and said, "There's a structure 2 kilometers east. Old, sealed. Shows up on some of the pre-village maps as a containment site." "A containment site for what?" Sakura asked. "The records are incomplete." Kakashi turned another page. "Which is usually interesting." Tezuro stopped walking. The cloth in his hands twisted into a knot. I mean, it's not, there's something there that belongs to my family. An heirloom. Something that was sealed away before I was born. I just wanted to see it." He looked at his feet. "I knew you wouldn't take me if that was the destination. The trading post is real. We can still go. I thought if we passed close enough." "How close is close enough?" Sasuke said flatly. Tezuro said nothing. Kakashi finally closed his book. He looked at Tezuro for a long moment with that single visible eye, calm and unreadable, then looked east through the trees. Something passed across his expression, not concern exactly, more like the face of a man doing a very fast calculation. 1 hour, he said. We take a look. Then we complete the actual mission. Naruto was already moving east before Kakashi finished the sentence. The structure wasn't much to look at from above. A depression in the earth, ringed by old trees that leaned inward like they were listening, with a stone platform at the center half swallowed by moss and root systems. The ceiling work was visible if you knew what to look for, faded ink lines carved into the rock, arrays that Kakashi crouched over and studied in silence while Sasuke stood at the perimeter with his arms crossed and Sakura tried to read the symbols over Kakashi's shoulder. Naruto walked straight to the center of the platform. "Naruto," Sakura said. "It's fine." He pressed his foot against the largest stone. "Nothing's happening." The stone dropped. Not dramatically, not with a rumble or a rush of displaced air. It just sank 2 centimeters with a soft, definitive click, like a key turning in a lock, and then the seals along the platform's edge went dark. Not glowing dark, just dark. Like they'd been switched off. Tezuro made a sound like a man watching his house burn down. Kakashi was on his feet instantly. Everyone back, a section of earth 3 meters wide opened beneath Naruto and he fell straight through. He didn't fall far, maybe 6 meters, and he hit a slope of packed dirt that sent him rolling rather than dropping, which was lucky even if it didn't feel lucky while it was happening. He came to a stop flat on his back in absolute darkness, dust settling around him, the sound of his own breathing suddenly very loud. "Naruto!" Sakura's voice from above, distant and muffled. "I'm fine," he called back. Yeah, I'm fine. Don't come down." He sat up. His palms were scraped but nothing was broken. He waited for his eyes to adjust, and when they did it was because light was coming from somewhere ahead of him, not torchlight, not the cold blue of a chakra construct. Something warmer than that. Something that made him think, for a reason he couldn't explain, of the color just before dawn when the sky can't decide if it's still night. He followed it. The passage was narrow and low, carved from stone that looked different from the rock above, smoother, older, the kind of precision that didn't come from shinobi tools. He ran his fingers along the wall as he walked and felt faint grooves, lines that might have been writing in a script he'd never seen. The air was completely still. Not stale, not damp, just still, like the room ahead had been waiting for exactly this long and wasn't in any hurry. The passage opened into a chamber about the size of a small training room. The walls were bare. The floor was bare. In the exact center of the chamber, sitting on a stone pedestal that came up to Naruto's chest, was a book. It was black. Not dark-covered or shadow-colored, actively, absolutely black, the kind of black that seemed to pull light toward it rather than reflect it. The pages were visible along the spine, and they were black too, every one of them. There were no markings on the cover, no title, no seal, no lock. It sat there like it had always been there, like the entire structure had been built for the specific purpose of keeping it in this exact spot. Naruto stared at it for a moment. Then he reached out and picked it up. The moment his fingers touched the cover, something moved through him that had nothing to do with chakra. He'd felt chakra his whole life, everyone had, it was as natural as blood pressure, the constant low hum of energy in his coils. This was the opposite of that hum. It was a silence that went so deep it hurt, like having cotton stuffed into the part of his brain that processed sound, except instead of sound it was every supernatural sense he'd developed as a shinobi. For exactly 3 seconds he felt completely ordinary. No chakra. No kyubi. Nothing. Then it snapped back, and the book fell open in his hands. The pages weren't blank. They were covered in script, that same script from the walls, dense and layered, line after line of it, but as he looked at it, it began to change. Not translating exactly, more like his eyes started reading it the way they read anything, the meaning arriving without passing through the step of conscious interpretation. He understood it the way he understood that fire was hot or that ramen was good, immediately, instinctively, without having to think about it. Anti-magic, the first page said, in whatever wordless language it was speaking directly into his skull. The absolute negation of all constructed power. Not destruction. Not reversal. Negation. The return of energy to the state before it was shaped by will. The Kyubi's chakra surged suddenly, violently, like a fist slamming a wall. The book's silence hit back just as hard. Naruto sat down hard on the floor, both hands on the cover, every muscle in his body locking up as the two forces slammed against each other inside his chest. It lasted maybe 4 seconds and it felt like 4 hours, and when it was over he was panting on the stone floor of an ancient chamber with a black grimoire in his lap and his heart running at about twice its normal speed. Interesting host, the book said. Or didn't say, he didn't hear anything. But the meaning was there. 2 contained infinities. One will serve as the anchor. The other will serve as the fuel. What the hell does that mean? Naruto said out loud. The book didn't answer. It just sat there, open, its black pages somehow readable in the dim chamber light, waiting for him to keep reading. He did. He was down there for 20 minutes. By the time he climbed back up, the passage had a second exit, a ladder cut into the stone that he found by running his hand along the left wall. Kakashi was standing at the edge of the opening with his arms folded and the patient expression of a man who had decided not to catastrophize until he had more information. Tezuro was gone. Naruto registered that distantly, filed it away. What did you find? Kakashi asked. Naruto held up the grimoire. Kakashi looked at it. His eye didn't widen but something around it tightened, the subtle language of a man who recognized that he was looking at something he didn't have a category for. He reached out slowly, and his fingers stopped 2 centimeters from the cover. Not because Naruto pulled back. Because the book's field, that deep, bone-level silence, extended just far enough to make Kakashi's hand slow instinctively, the way you slow down walking into a room that feels wrong without being able to say why. Interesting, Kakashi said quietly. He pulled his hand back. What is it? A grimoire. Naruto looked down at it. It's called anti-magic. Sasuke made a sharp sound. Anti-magic? That's not a real thing. It opened for me, Naruto said. Not bragging, just stating it. Nobody else can touch it. That's a seal, probably, on the cover. We could, Sasuke. Naruto looked at him. I'm telling you what it is. Sasuke met his eyes and went quiet, which almost never happened, and which Sakura noticed immediately. Does it hurt? She asked, looking at Naruto's hands, his posture, the way he was holding the book slightly away from his body. Naruto, does it? It's fine, he said. I mean, it's not comfortable. But it's fine. Kakashi looked at him for a long moment. We'll talk tonight. At camp. He turned back toward the path east. Right now we have a mission to finish. Naruto tucked the grimoire under his arm and followed. The book was warm against his side, the way a coal was warm, the way something was warm when it was still deciding whether to burn. Camp that night was quiet. They'd reached the trading post, delivered nothing since Tezuro had apparently collected his payment in advance and disappeared, and Kakashi had written the whole situation up as a client absconded mid-mission report that was technically accurate and practically useless. They sat around a small fire in a clearing west of the post, and Naruto had the grimoire open in his lap and was reading. Nobody said anything for a while. Sasuke was watching Naruto the way he watched opponents during a fight, measuring, cataloging, that Sharingan instinct even when the eyes were black and human. He wasn't doing it consciously. Naruto could tell because Sasuke's jaw was tight and his hands were resting on his knees with his fingers slightly spread, which was what his hands did when he was genuinely unsettled and trying to look like he wasn't. Stop staring, Naruto said without looking up. I'm not staring. Your eyeballs are literally burning a hole in my forehead. I'm thinking. Think quieter. Sakura looked between them and clearly decided this was not a hill she wanted to die on tonight. She pulled her knees up and looked at the book instead. What does it actually do? Anti-magic. Exactly what it sounds like. Naruto turned a page. The script shifted under his eyes, reforming, a new layer of meaning rising to the surface. It cancels constructed energy. Any power that got shaped by a will, jutsu, seals, summoning contracts, chakra constructs, the anti-magic reaches into whatever holds that shape together and removes the tension. Like cutting a bowstring. Removes the tension, Kakashi said. He was lying on his back with one arm under his head, looking at the stars. You make it sound precise. It is precise. That's the thing. Naruto held up his right hand, palm up. It's not like an explosion where everything in the radius gets hit. I can direct it. I can put it in my hands, in a specific finger, in my feet. I can breathe it out. I can, he stopped. Can what? Sakura asked. I'm still reading. He turned another page. There's a lot here. Kakashi turned his head to look at him. The firelight made his silver hair look orange, which was a bit undignified for someone who projected such relentless composure. Naruto. 2 things. First, the Kyuubi. How is it responding? Naruto was quiet for a moment. Badly. He said it simply. It doesn't like the book. The anti-magic and the Kyuubi's chakra are kind of pushing against each other. Like 2 magnets wrong side out. He turned his palm over and looked at his knuckles. But it's holding. The book said it would hold. The book told you this. Yeah. The book speaks to you. Not out loud. Naruto touched his temple. In here. Like knowing. Kakashi looked at the stars again. Second thing. Don't use it around me until I've had a chance to study the theory. Nullifying my chakra in combat range could be lethal. Obviously, sensei. I'm saying obviously because you have a history of not thinking before you, I know. I get it. Naruto closed the grimoire. The soft field of silence extended for just a second and the fire dimmed slightly, not from a wind, just from the anti-magic brushing against the chakra that Shinobi kept in their bodies even at rest. Then it receded as he pulled it back. I get it. Everyone stared at the fire for a second. That was you? Sakura said. Accident, Naruto said. Still learning the dial. Sasuke uncrossed his legs, stood up, and walked to the edge of the firelight. He stood with his back to them, looking into the dark. Naruto watched the line of his shoulders, the tension in them, the way they sat differently than usual. Sasuke, he said. It's fine. Go to sleep, Sasuke said. And that was the last anyone spoke that night. 3 weeks. That was what they had before the Chunin Exams, and Naruto used every hour of them. He trained alone mostly. Kakashi had given him space, which was both a gift and a signal that the man was worried and didn't want to project it. The training ground he used was the furthest one from the village, the old one with the cracked earth and the dead training posts that nobody used anymore because the ground was unstable. He liked the instability. It kept him moving. The grimoire had given him the theory in those first 20 minutes underground. The weeks of training were the practice of making the theory real in his body, the way you could understand the mechanics of swimming perfectly and still swallow half the ocean your first time in deep water. Anti-magic wasn't chakra. It didn't flow through chakra pathways the way ninjutsu did. It existed in a separate layer, something the book called the negation depth, a kind of sub-reality that ran parallel to the chakra world, beneath it, like a cold current beneath a warm river. Accessing it required something that felt like reaching through the floor of your own chest, grabbing something that wasn't a handle but functioned like one, and pulling. The first 50 times Naruto tried it he got nothing. The 51st time he got too much, the negation depth opened fully and every chakra construct within 30 meters went dark simultaneously, including a training post that had a standard explosive tag on it that Naruto had forgotten about. The explosion was small. The column of smoke was visible from the village. Kakashi appeared on the training ground 11 seconds after the explosion and stood in the dissipating smoke with his book open, reading, like he just happened to be in the area. I'm fine, Naruto said from the crater. I can see that. Kakashi turned a page. Control before power, please. We're 3 weeks out. I know. I got the power part down. The control, Naruto climbed out of the crater. Is a different conversation. Make it a short one. Naruto made it 2 weeks. By the end of the second week he could draw just the edge of the negation depth, a thin current of anti-magic that he could coat his palms with, precise enough to cancel a single paper tag without affecting the tag next to it. By the end of the third he could run it up both arms, breathe it in a controlled exhale, focus it in a single fingertip and negate a flying shuriken without touching the ground beneath it. The Kyuubi watched all of this from behind its cage bars with the expression. Naruto always imagined the expression, he couldn't actually see it, but he felt it, of something enormous trying very hard not to show that it was impressed and alarmed in equal measure. On the 8th day of training, the Kyuubi broke its silence for the first time. That thing you carry, it said, in the deep below sleep space where they'd spoken before. It's not from this world. I know, Naruto said. It doesn't belong here. It doesn't belong with the chakra system. It exists outside the laws. I know. If it overtakes your system, it won't, Naruto said. I won't let it. A long silence. Then, grudgingly, see that you don't. I have no interest in being nullified out of existence by a book. Nobody's nullifying you, Naruto said. I need you. The book said so. Another silence. And then, which surprised Naruto considerably, I know. I read it too. He hadn't known that Kyuubi could access the grimoire's communications. He filed that away as something interesting and slightly terrifying and kept training. The day before the Chunin Exams, Team 7 had a final sparring session in Training Ground 3. Kakashi refereed from the log with his book, which meant he was watching with about 90% of his attention while appearing to use about 5%, which was standard. Sasuke and Naruto squared off across the clearing, and Sakura sat on the sideline with her first aid kit open on principle. It started as a normal spar. Taijutsu, testing each other's positioning, nothing flashy. Sasuke was faster than Naruto in a straight exchange, always had been, and he pressed that advantage early, landing 2 clean strikes to Naruto's ribs before Naruto found his rhythm. Then Sasuke reached for the Chidori. It was an impulse more than a plan. The blue lightning crackled to life in his palm, that sharp sound of birds' scream that always turned heads on training grounds, and he moved with it, the focused, blinding forward thrust that was his signature strike, the one that had dropped stronger opponents than Naruto Uzumaki. Naruto didn't dodge. He raised his right hand, palm flat, and let the negation depth surface. The Chidori hit his hand and died. Not dissipated, not redirected, not blocked, died. The lightning was there and then it wasn't, snuffed out between one moment and the next with a sound like, nothing. That was the thing. There was no sound. Chakra systems created sound when they dispersed, always, some version of crackle or pop or rush of displaced air. The anti-magic left nothing. It left silence so complete that the birds in the surrounding trees briefly stopped calling. Sasuke stood with his palm pressed against Naruto's hand. His Chidori was gone. His expression was perfectly still. Naruto looked at him. I told you it was real, Naruto said. Sasuke pulled his hand back. He looked at his palm, completely unharmed, which was somehow more unsettling than if it had been scorched. He closed his fingers slowly. Do it again, he said. Sasuke, Sakura started. Do it again, Sasuke said, not looking away from Naruto. Naruto turned his hand over, closed it, opened it. Not unless you've got another jutsu to waste. The look on Sasuke's face was complex, layered, fast-moving, like watching weather change over open water. Naruto had never seen Sasuke look at him quite like that. Not with fear, but with something adjacent to it. Something colder. Something that had teeth. Interesting, Kakashi said from the log. His book was closed. He was watching with all of his attention now. Both of you. Get some rest tonight. Naruto looked back at Sasuke one more time and then turned and walked off the training ground. Behind him, he heard Sasuke stand very still for a moment, no footsteps, no movement, and then walk in the opposite direction. Sakura jogged to catch up with Naruto. She fell into step beside him without saying anything at first, which was how she handled things she was still processing. 3 minutes down the path she said, how controlled is it? Pretty controlled now, he said. Pretty. She said the word carefully. More than last week. He glanced at her. I'm not going to accidentally kill anyone, if that's what you're asking. I wasn't asking that. You were kind of asking that. She was quiet for a moment. Your chakra pathways look different. I've been watching during training. There's something moving alongside the normal flow, it's faint, but it's there. Like a shadow current. She paused. I've never seen anything like it in any medical text. That's the anti-magic, he said. It doesn't use the pathways. It runs next to them. Is it safe? Naruto was quiet for a moment. The grimoire was under his arm, warm and silent. The book says the host either adapts or it doesn't. Sakura stopped walking. He stopped too, and they looked at each other in the late afternoon light with the trees around them making their long shadows. "What does that mean?" she asked quietly. "It means I'm adapting," Naruto said. Simply. Certainly. Like a fact he'd already decided rather than one he'd been given. "So don't worry about it." Sakura studied his face for a moment longer than she normally would, that sharp medic's assessment she tried to hide with the civilian girl performance she still put on sometimes. Then she nodded and started walking again. "Don't do anything stupid in the exam," she said. "No promises," he said, and grinned, and it was the first time all week that the grin felt completely normal. The morning of the Chunin exams, Konoha was loud with it. Teams from every major village moved through the streets with that particular quality of controlled energy that preceded high-stakes competition, focused, alert, sizing each other up with the practiced casualness of people who wanted to look like they weren't doing exactly that. Naruto walked through it with the grimoire tucked under his left arm, his headband tied around his forehead, and absolutely no attempt to look small or uncertain. He was watching the other genin the way the grimoire had taught him to watch, not for intent, for chakra. Every person in this street was running chakra through their system, most of them unconsciously, the way civilians ran blood pressure. He could see the shape of it now, a kind of secondary perception that the anti-magic had unlocked in him, like a pair of glasses that let him see a color he hadn't known existed. Blue-white for Konoha Shinobi using the standard chakra cultivation method. Denser and redder for the Sand Genin across the street, a different school, different physical pathways, the signature of a different training culture. Green-gold for the Rain team he'd spotted earlier, their chakra sitting tight and compressed, which usually meant their school emphasized suppression over projection. And at the far end of the street, one signature that was completely wrong. Not wrong like foreign school wrong. Wrong like shouldn't be here wrong. Chakra that was thick and dark and moved with intention even when the person standing in it was completely still. Naruto's eyes found the figure before he'd consciously processed the search, tall, pale, dark-robed, standing in an alley mouth with the practiced invisibility of someone who'd spent decades making crowds not notice them. The figure's eyes met Naruto's across the distance. Yellow. Slitted. Amused. The anti-magic pulled, hard, toward the surface. Naruto felt it lunge like an animal on a chain, and he held it down with both hands figuratively speaking, kept his face neutral, kept walking. The figure in the alley smiled with too many teeth and then stepped backward into shadow and was gone. Naruto walked 3 more meters and then turned to Sakura. "Did you see anyone in that alley?" Sakura looked. "No." He turned to Sasuke. "You." Sasuke was already looking at the alley, his eyes tracking something invisible. "No," he said. "But I can smell the chakra signature." "We're going to have a problem," Naruto said. "We're always going to have a problem," Sasuke said. "That's never been the issue." Naruto looked at the grimoire in his hand. The book was warm. Much warmer than usual. It was the first time he'd felt it react to a chakra signature other than the Kyuubi's, and the reaction wasn't the settling, anchoring pull he felt when it interfaced with the fox's power. This was different. This was recognition. The kind of recognition a predator shows when it identifies what kind of prey it's looking at. Whatever was in that alley, the anti-magic already knew what it wanted to do to it. Naruto let himself smile a little. Just slightly. Just enough. Then he walked through the doors of the academy and into whatever was about to happen next. Chapter 2, Reading the Dark. The Forest of Death had a real name. Training Ground 44, officially, which was the kind of designation that made it sound manageable, numbered, categorized, filed away in some administrative record somewhere alongside Training Ground 3 and Training Ground 7 like they were all more or less the same thing. They were not more or less the same thing. Naruto knew this the moment he stepped through the gate and felt the forest breathe. That was the only word for it. The tree canopy was so dense overhead that the light came through in fragments, shifting and unreliable, and the air beneath it had weight, humid and layered, full of things that were alive and not inclined toward mercy. The forest didn't feel hostile exactly. It felt indifferent, which was worse. Hostile things at least acknowledged you existed. The anti-magic felt it too. It stirred in that deep below layer, that negation depth running alongside his chakra pathways, and settled into a kind of watchful alertness that Naruto had already learned to read. The grimoire didn't speak in words often, mostly impressions, directional instincts, the kind of knowledge that arrived fully formed without the journey. Right now it was telling him, in that wordless way, that there were chakra signatures in the forest that it found interesting. He didn't ask which ones. He figured he'd find out. Anko Mitarashi had explained the rules with the cheerful energy of someone who genuinely enjoyed watching people realize how bad their situation was. 2 scrolls, heaven and earth, one of each, 5 days, get to the tower in the center. What she hadn't explained, because it was the kind of thing you either knew going in or learned the hard way, was that the forest floor was a kill zone and the canopy was a slightly less immediate kill zone, and the open ground between the trees was where people who weren't paying attention ceased being people who were going to pass the exam. Team 7 moved through the first hour in silence. Sasuke led from above, tree-hopping with the smooth economy of motion that came from years of training at a level Naruto had spent most of his life frantically trying to match. Sakura tracked their 12 o'clock, her sensing skills stretched wide, monitoring perimeter. Naruto ran the rear, and nobody commented on the grimoire that sat in the small pack on his back, sealed in a chakra null wrapping that Kakashi had rigged up, a practical measure that kept the anti-magic from bleeding into the surrounding forest and giving away their position through chakra disruption. Naruto had spent the last hour of the briefing yesterday reading the grimoire's chapter on targeting. It was thorough. Anti-magic, at base level, required physical proximity, touch, or very close range, the way Chidori required the arm to extend. But the grimoire had described a secondary application, something it called a negation pulse, that worked differently. Instead of reaching through the negation depth along a direct line, you built pressure first, compressed the anti-magic into a dense point in the chest, let it build against the Kyuubi's chakra like water against a dam, and then released it outward in a radial burst. Short range. Maybe 5 meters. But it would kill every active jutsu in that radius simultaneously, without discrimination. He hadn't been able to practice it. Too much collateral effect on the training ground, too many chakra-based structures in Konoha that he'd have disrupted. He knew the theory perfectly. The practice was going to be the first time. He was all right with that. He'd always learned better in live situations anyway. Team at 4 o'clock, Sasuke said quietly from above. Naruto looked. 3 figures moving through the lower branches to the right, fast and coordinated, not trying to conceal their direction, which meant either they were confident enough not to care, or they were using themselves as bait, or they were the kind of genin who hadn't yet learned that confidence and competence were different things. He tracked their chakra signatures through the new perception the anti-magic had given him and got his answer fast. The signatures were dense and technically precise, hidden sound, from the quality of it, that tight-channeled chakra school that ran sound frequencies through the system, and they were moving in a triangular formation that was specifically designed for encirclement. Sound team, Naruto said. 3 of them. They've been paralleling us for the last 20 minutes. Sakura turned her head slightly. I didn't pick them up. Anti-magic sense, he said simply. I can read chakra signatures differently now. She accepted this and filed it away and stayed focused, which was one of the things he'd come to quietly respect about Sakura. She processed new information fast and didn't argue with it when the situation was moving. The sound team dropped from the branches and landed in a loose triangle around them. 3 genin, all wearing the same flat expression of people executing a plan they were confident in. The one at the front was a boy with wrapped arms and a smile that didn't extend past his mouth. The 2 flanking him were a girl with a flute hanging at her belt and another boy whose eyes were slightly unfocused in the way that meant he was already running a sensory jutsu. Konoha team, the front one said. We'll be taking your scroll. Which one? Naruto asked pleasantly. The boy blinked. What? Which scroll? Heaven or earth? Because we've got heaven. If you've got heaven too, then taking ours doesn't help you, so you'd be doing all this for nothing. Naruto tilted his head. You've got earth, right? So you want heaven. The boy recovered fast. Hand it over and nobody gets hurt. Here's a counteroffer, Naruto said. Tell me where Orochimaru is and we'll let you leave with what you came in with. Now all three of them went still. The kind of still that happened when a name landed wrong. We don't know who, your chakra signatures are sound, Naruto said. Orochimaru created the hidden sound. So either you're independent contractors, which seems unlikely for Genin, or you work for him, which means you know exactly where he is. He shrugged. I'm not even asking you to betray him. Just a direction. The flute girl's hand had moved to her instrument. The censor boy's unfocused eyes had sharpened. The front boy's smile was completely gone now. Take them, he said. The flute came up and sound came out of it, not music, a weaponized frequency, the kind that hit chakra pathways like a hammer on glass, designed to disorient and destabilize the inner ear. Naruto felt it hit him and felt the negation depth surge up simultaneously, and the two forces cancelled each other with a sound like a door slamming. He felt nothing. The sound jutsu had lasted approximately long enough to be recognized. Sasuke, not protected by any such counter, dropped from the tree above with his hand already moving toward fire release. Sakura was already moving laterally, creating angles, breaking the triangle formation by pulling the sensor's attention. Standard Team 7 disruption, they drilled it enough times that it was reflex now. Naruto walked forward. The front boy launched a sound frequency palm strike, his wrapped arms were conductors for the technique. Naruto could see the chakra channeling along the bandages in bright precise lines, and Naruto caught his wrist. One hand. Flat grip. The anti-magic flowed from his palm into the contact point and everything running through those bandaged arms went quiet. The chakra patterns dissolved. The boy's eyes went wide. That's called anti-magic, Naruto said, and threw him sideways into the censor boy, and they both hit the forest floor in a tangle. The flute girl made a decision fast, smarter than the other two, clearly, and ran. Naruto let her go. The information about Orochimaru was gone with her, but that was all right. He already knew a direction. The grimoire had given it to him the moment he stepped into the forest, that recognition pulled towards something dark and deep in the southeastern quadrant of Training Ground 44. Sasuke had put the censor boy down with a clean strike. The front boy was sitting up, looking at his arms like they'd betrayed him, which technically they had. Your technique is gone, Naruto told him. Not unkindly. The chakra structure's been negated. You'll rebuild it in a few days once your pathways re-establish the pattern. Don't try to force it before then. He looked at the boy's scroll, tucked in his vest. Also, we're taking that. The boy looked at Sasuke, who was watching him with zero visible interest in being argued with. He looked at Sakura, who had a kunai in one hand and a very practical expression on her face. He looked at Naruto. He handed over the scroll. Southeast, Naruto said. He's southeast. If that's where you're supposed to report, you might want to take your time getting there. He turned and started moving. Come on. They found the second team 2 hours later, and that one was harder. Not because the genin were stronger, they were a rain team, technically proficient, their chakra signatures exactly as tight and compressed as Naruto had read them outside the academy. Hard. But manageable. What made it harder was the terrain. The rain team had chosen a section of forest where the trees grew so close together that the canopy above was essentially solid, and they'd set a layered genjutsu across the entire area, not a combat genjutsu, a concealment one, the kind that made the environment report wrong information to every sense including chakra sense. Sakura walked into it first and stopped. Genjutsu, she said immediately, which was fast. Naruto hadn't even registered the wrongness yet, but Sakura's chakra control was exceptional and she'd felt the foreign pattern entering her sensory system before it completed its loop. Kai, Sasuke said, and broke it for himself. Sakura broke hers. Naruto looked around at the space they were standing in, his chakra sense perception was warped, the signatures of the rain team blurring and multiplying like reflections in broken water, and thought for a moment about using the same method. Then he breathed out. The exhale carried a thin current of anti-magic, dispersed in a mist rather than directed at a point. It spread out about 4 meters in every direction and every genjutsu structure it touched collapsed silently. The layered concealment fell off the forest like a coat sliding off a chair. The rain team's position became visible immediately, 12 meters up, 3 of them in a spread formation, their expressions shifting from confident to alarmed in the space of a second. "Hi," Naruto said. They came down fast and hard, which he appreciated, they were serious about this even when surprised. The first one hit him with a water-style jutsu that should have drenched him and destabilized his footing on the roots below. It hit his negation field at arm's length and turned into regular, uncharged water that fell harmlessly to the dirt. The second went for Sasuke and got a fireball for his trouble. The third went for Sakura, which was a strategic decision he understood, take the medic, and was going to regret because Sakura's taijutsu, underestimated by everyone who saw her slight frame and pink hair, was legitimately dangerous when she was annoyed, and she was annoyed. Naruto took the first rain shinobi's wrist the same way he'd taken the sound boy's, flat contact, anti-magic through the skin, and the elaborate water-nature chakra network that Genin built up over years of specialized training came apart in 3 seconds. The boy dropped to one knee. Not from pain, from the sudden vertiginous emptiness of having your chakra system disturbed at the structural level. "I need your scroll," Naruto said. "And I need you to not try anything for about 30 seconds while my teammates finish." The boy looked up at him. Rain Shinobi had a reputation for stubbornness, their village ran on it, operating in constant wet misery under a leader who'd run their system hard for decades. This boy had that same quality in his face, that compressed, weathered quality of someone who'd been hardened young. He didn't hand the scroll over easily. He thought about it first. Then he looked at Naruto's hand. At the point of contact where the anti-magic had dissolved his water nature structure. At the perfect, unharmed skin of Naruto's palm. "What are you?" he asked. Genuinely curious. Not afraid, just curious. "Still figuring that out," Naruto said. The boy unclipped the scroll from his belt and held it out. Sasuke and Sakura finished in the time it took Naruto to pocket it. No injuries on either side. Sakura had a slight flush from exertion. Sasuke looked exactly as he always looked, like he was operating at about 70% effort and keeping the rest in reserve for something he considered worth it. They were back in motion within 2 minutes. It was the 5th hour when the temperature dropped. Not the air temperature. Something else. A quality of presence that moved through the forest from the southeast like a change in pressure, the way you felt a storm before you heard it. Naruto felt the anti-magic snap to full alert before any of his other senses registered anything. Then the grimoire, the physical book in his pack, went from warm to hot, and he pulled it out without thinking. The pages had opened on their own. The script was moving. Significant signature, it told him. Chakra in excess of standard range. Multiple nature transformations held simultaneously. Old power. Patient. "Stop," Naruto said. Team 7 stopped. The forest around them was completely silent. No birds. No insects. The silence of animals that had decided, collectively, that something in the vicinity was too much to be near. Sasuke's hand was at his pouch. Sakura had gone flat against a tree trunk, presenting minimum profile, her eyes scanning upward. Naruto stood in the open with the grimoire held at his side, the anti-magic running at full surface, coating both arms in that invisible, silence-deep field. A figure dropped from above. Not fast. Slowly. Like someone who had no interest in appearing dangerous because the appearance was irrelevant. He landed 10 meters in front of them and straightened, and he was tall and pale with long black hair and yellow eyes and a smile that Naruto had last seen at the end of an alley on exam morning. He was wearing a rain headband, which explained the sound team's presence, borrowed identities, the way someone might borrow a coat. "My," Orochimaru said, looking at the three of them with genuine interest, the way a naturalist looks at a species he's been hunting for months. "What an interesting team." His gaze moved past Sasuke, which was interesting, because Sasuke was the one everyone looked at first, the Uchiha, the obvious prize. His gaze moved past Sakura. It settled on Naruto, and on the grimoire in his hand, and something moved in those yellow eyes that Naruto didn't have a name for. Hunger was too small a word. Recognition was closer. "That's quite an object," Orochimaru said. "Where did you find it?" "Classified," Naruto said. Orochimaru's smile widened. "You read it already, of course. You've been practicing." He tilted his head. "How much of it have you accessed?" "The surface layer only, I'd imagine." "You've had, what, 3 weeks?" Naruto said nothing. "Don't be embarrassed. The text in a grimoire of that caliber takes years to fully internalize. The fact that you've accessed any of it at your age is remarkable." Orochimaru took one step forward. "I've been looking for that book for 11 years. I found references to it in pre-village records, a weapon created before the chakra system was codified, designed to exist outside the laws that govern all shinobi technique. Do you understand what you're carrying?" "A book," Naruto said. "That belongs to me." "Ah." The yellow eyes were warm. It was worse than if they'd been cold. "You have spirit. I do appreciate that." He looked at Sasuke again, briefly, considering something. "I came here for 2 things today. I'll be taking one of them now and returning for the other." His eyes came back to Naruto. "The grimoire, I wonder. Can you actually use it against me, or have you only managed the basics?" "Want to find out?" Naruto said. Orochimaru moved. He was fast in the way that made fast feel like an inadequate word, not speed like a genin who trained hard, speed like something that had spent decades refining itself into a single efficient instrument. He covered the 10 meters between them in a blink and his palm was coming for Naruto's face and Naruto didn't dodge. He let it land. The moment the palm connected with his face, Naruto pushed every available current of anti-magic through his skin at the contact point, and Orochimaru's chakra-enhanced strike, the force multiplication, the hidden destructive release at the moment of impact that would have caved Naruto's skull if it had connected as intended, died on his face like a candle in a thunderstorm. What remained was the physical force of the palm, which snapped Naruto's head back and made his eyes water, but physical force without chakra enhancement was just physics. It hurt. It didn't destroy. Naruto grabbed the wrist. Orochimaru went still. The anti-magic ran along the contact point between them and hit Orochimaru's chakra system like a wall hitting a wall, and Naruto felt the resistance, genuine and enormous, because Orochimaru's system wasn't a genin's carefully built structure. It was a fortress. Decades deep, multiple nature transformations layered and cross-braced, chakra pathways reinforced to a density that the anti-magic had to work against rather than through. But it was working. He saw it in Orochimaru's face, the first and only genuine surprise. Something was moving through his system that shouldn't have been possible, pulling at the structures he'd spent a lifetime building, and for a fraction of a second his expression was the expression of a man who had encountered something he did not have a prepared response for. The 5-element seal was somewhere in Orochimaru's system. Naruto could feel it the way you could feel a loaded weapon by its weight and heat, but he couldn't reach it cleanly. Not in one contact. The fortress was too deep. Orochimaru disengaged. Not panicked, controlled, deliberate. He pulled his wrist free and stepped back and put 4 meters between them in one movement. The smile was still there. It was a different smile now. "Interesting," Orochimaru said, and his voice was completely steady, which was impressive, because Naruto could see the faint irregularities in his chakra signature where the anti-magic had disturbed the surface layers. Could feel it. Very interesting. You have more access than I estimated. He looked at his own wrist. At nothing, because nothing was visible. At the disruption he could feel internally. That's the negation touch. You're using it at contact range through the skin. And you managed to interfere with my system, briefly. His eyes came up. Most impressive. Thanks, Naruto said. I've been practicing. You said. Orochimaru looked at Sasuke again, and the calculation was back, open now, no longer hidden behind the naturalist curiosity. I'll conclude my business here and be on my way. He raised one hand and the forest around them seemed to thicken, something vast and terrible rising in the chakra landscape around them, all that patient old power pulling itself together into something functional. Naruto stepped in front of Sasuke. Orochimaru paused. His eyes moved from Naruto to Sasuke and back. Then, softly, you would place yourself between him and me. Obviously, Naruto said. He's your rival, Orochimaru said. I know how these things work in Konoha's genin culture. The competitive dynamic. The constant tension. He's my teammate, Naruto said. Something shifted in Orochimaru's expression. Not the smile, that stayed. But behind the smile, something recalculated. He looked at Naruto the way he had in the alley, that recognition pull, and this time Naruto thought he understood what the recognition was. It wasn't the grimoire Orochimaru recognized. It was the quality of the decision Naruto had just made, immediate, unquestioning, completely without the self-conscious heroism that made most such gestures feel performative. You know, Orochimaru said thoughtfully, I wonder which of you is actually the more interesting acquisition. The anti-magic burst. Naruto didn't plan it. Didn't decide it consciously. The negation pulse he'd been reading about, the one he'd never practiced, the compressed and released radial blast, came out of him the way a breath came out after being held too long. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't controlled. It came from his chest in a ring that expanded outward at about running speed, 5 meters in every direction, and everything in that ring that was chakra constructed went instantly silent. The forest around them. Every jutsu Orochimaru had been assembling, the vast, patient power pulling itself together, fell apart. Not slowly, not dramatically. Just suddenly wasn't there. The pressure that had been building in the air released and the trees straightened and the wildlife noise came back in an instant rush, birds and insects resuming like a recording unpaused. Orochimaru stood in the center of it, his chakra enhancement stripped from him down to base level, his jutsu constructs gone, his prepared techniques dissolved. For approximately 2 seconds he was standing in the forest of death as a man, not a weapon. He looked at Naruto. Naruto looked back, panting slightly from the effort, one hand pressed to his sternum where the pulse had torn through, the Kyuubi's chakra roiling and furious at having been disturbed by the blast. I wasn't ready for that, Orochimaru said. Not defensive. Factual, with the intellectual honesty of a man who gave credit where it was due. An uncontrolled negation pulse. Impressive range. Worse control. He tilted his head. You'll kill yourself before you master it. Or I'll master it before it kills me, Naruto said. I like those odds better. Orochimaru smiled, and this time it reached his eyes, which was deeply unsettling. He reached into his robe and produced a scroll, Earth Scroll, Naruto registered, and tossed it onto the ground between them. Your second scroll. A gift. I do enjoy investing in potential. He turned away. We'll speak again, Naruto Uzumaki. Looking forward to it, Naruto said. Orochimaru dissolved into the shadows between the trees and was gone. No dramatic exit. No residual chakra signature. Just absence, clean and complete, like he'd never been there except for the scroll on the ground and the lingering disruption in the forest's chakra field where Naruto's pulse had hit. Sakura moved first. She crossed to Naruto and put both hands on his chest, medic's chakra flowing through her palms, gentle, diagnostic. She was checking the pathway damage from the pulse, and the expression on her face as she read what she found was the expression of someone doing mental math on a very alarming set of numbers. "How bad?" he asked. "Not great." She didn't soften it. "The pulse tore against your own coils on the way out. There's microdamage in the chest pathways. Nothing structural but," she paused. "But it's going to get structural if you do it again without the control worked out." "Got it. Naruto." "I got it, Sakura." He looked at the scroll on the ground. "We've got both scrolls." Sasuke picked up the earth scroll. He'd been completely silent through the entire encounter, which was unusual enough that both Naruto and Sakura looked at him. He examined the scroll in his hand, turned it over once, and then looked at the trees where Orochimaru had disappeared. "He came for me," Sasuke said quietly. "Not a question." "He wanted the grimoire more," Naruto said. Sasuke was quiet for a moment. "But I was the original target." "Maybe." Naruto shrugged. "Doesn't matter. He didn't get either." Sasuke turned his head and looked at Naruto. The look lasted longer than was comfortable, that same multi-layered expression from the training ground, cold and fast-moving, except now there was something else mixed in. Something that wasn't the cold at all. Something that Sasuke clearly had no intention of naming or acknowledging. "You stepped in front of me," he said. "I was closer," Naruto said. "You were not closer." "I was emotionally closer." Sasuke made a sound that was almost a laugh and wasn't quite anything. He tucked the earth scroll into his vest and turned toward the tower. "Let's move. We've wasted enough time." Naruto grinned and fell into step behind him, and Sakura fell in beside Naruto with the compact, determined stride of someone who had a list of medical concerns she was going to raise at the earliest opportunity and was being patient about it for tactical reasons. They made the tower by the end of the second day, well ahead of most other teams. The interior of the tower had the feeling of a place that had absorbed years of nervous energy. The walls knew what happened here, the relief and the exhaustion and the occasional devastation of teams who'd made it this far and arrived missing a member. The Team 7 that walked into the tower's central hall was complete, carrying both scrolls, and moving with the particular quality of people who'd already had a harder time than most would have in 5 days and were fine with it. Naruto sat down against the wall while Sakura and Sasuke opened the scrolls, which released a summoning that brought Irika, their old academy teacher, materializing in a puff of smoke with his usual combination of warmth and slight alarm that seemed to be his default setting around his former students. Irika looked at the three of them, professionally and personally, and said, "Are you all right?" "Fine," Sasuke said. "Couple of scrapes," Sakura said. "We met Orochimaru," Naruto said. Irika's professional composure took a significant hit. He left," Naruto said. "We've got both scrolls. We're fine." Irika looked at the grimoire in Naruto's hand and started to ask something and then decided, with the wisdom of a man who'd taught for years and knew when a conversation needed to wait, that the question could keep. "Get some rest," he said. "Preliminary rounds in the morning." Naruto leaned his head back against the cool stone wall and looked up at the tower ceiling. The grimoire was open in his lap. The script was moving again, not instructions now, more like a report, the way a system might update itself after heavy use. Cataloging what had happened. Processing Orochimaru's chakra structure as a data point. Refining its understanding of what large, complex, ancient chakra networks looked like so that the next time they touched one, the anti-magic could move through it faster. The Kyuubi was quiet. Which might have meant it was satisfied or might have meant it was thinking, and the difference between those two things was significant. "You used the pulse," it said, eventually. "Yeah," Naruto said internally. "Uncontrolled." "Also yeah. You could have killed yourself." "But I didn't." Another silence. Long and considered. "Then, no. You didn't." And you disrupted a chakra system of that density, however briefly. The voice was grudging, which was as close to impressed as it got. He'll come back with adjustments. I know. Naruto looked at the grimoire's moving script. So will I. The Kyuubi didn't answer. But the feeling behind its silence was different from earlier. The two magnets' wrong side out tension was still there, constant and grinding. But beneath it, something had shifted slightly, less pure opposition, more of a complicated, mutual, deeply reluctant acknowledgement that they were in the same position now. Both of them had touched Orochimaru's system and neither of them had broken on it. Naruto closed his eyes and let sleep come, and the grimoire stayed open in his lap and kept reading itself through the night, learning, preparing, getting ready for what came next. The preliminary rounds began at dawn. Chapter 3, Gaps in the Armor. The preliminary rounds took place in the basement of the tower, which was not a basement in any comfortable sense of the word. It was a long stone hall with observation balconies running along both sides, a single combat floor in the center, and a scoreboard on the far wall that displayed matchups in the flat, impartial way that only mechanical systems could manage. No drama, no build-up, just names appearing beside each other with the quiet finality of a door closing. Naruto stood on the upper balcony with his team and looked down at the floor and felt the anti-magic coiling and settling in his chest like a cat finding its position. He'd spent the night in the tower doing two things. Sleeping, which he needed. And letting the grimoire run its night cycle processing, which it needed. He'd woken up at some point around 3 in the morning to find the book had moved through 6 new sections while he slept, and the knowledge had filtered into him the way dreams did, fragmented at first, then solidifying into something usable. He knew more about anti-magic this morning than he had yesterday evening. Not dramatically more. Incrementally more. The kind of more that mattered in fights. The room filled around them. Genin from the forest of death, those who'd survived and made it to the tower, fewer than had started, which was always the case, the forest doing its arithmetic with its own methods. Naruto scanned the room the way the anti-magic had taught him to scan, reading chakra signatures like a language, building a map of who was standing on those balconies and what they were carrying in their systems. Sand team at the far end of the right balcony. 3 of them, which meant they'd made it through without loss, which was notable because plenty of full teams hadn't. The one in the middle, Gaara, he'd learned the name outside the academy, filed it alongside the signature, had a chakra system unlike anything else in the room. Not bigger exactly, though it was large. Different in quality. Dense and layered and continuously active, running at full engagement even standing still, like an engine that never idled. The sand that moved around him in slow, patient patterns wasn't incidental. It was chakra constructed, every grain of it held in a subtle continuous technique that never stopped running. Naruto looked at it with the negation depths perception and felt something click in his understanding. The sand was a permanent jutsu. Not an activated one, permanent, running around the clock, the way a seal worked. That was different from a combat technique. That was infrastructure. He filed it away. Niji Hyuga was 3 meters to Naruto's left, standing with the particular quality of stillness that the Hyuga cultivated, not the stillness of rest but the stillness of a coiled thing, every muscle ready. He had his arms crossed and his pale eyes forward and he wasn't looking at anyone on the floor yet. He was looking at Naruto. Not rudely. Clinically. With those Byakugan-adjacent eyes, the Dojutsu wasn't active but Hyuga had a natural visual acuity that bordered on the supernatural even without chakra enhancement, and the expression of a man reading something he found genuinely troubling. You can see it, can't you? Naruto said. Not a question. Niji's gaze moved to his face. The Byakugan can read chakra pathways in detail. Yours are, he paused, the way precise people paused when they needed to choose a word carefully, unusual. That's one way to put it. There's a secondary current running parallel to your main pathway system. Niji's voice was flat and informational, no judgment in it. He was reporting what he saw. It doesn't behave like chakra. It behaves like chakra's negative space. Like an absence that has mass. That's actually a really good description, Naruto said. Neji said nothing. He looked back at the floor. Then, it disrupts the Byakugan's ability to read your tenketsu accurately. I cannot tell how many of your chakra points are open or closed because the secondary current creates interference. He paused again. I find that irritating. Cool, Naruto said cheerfully. Neji turned to look at him with an expression that suggested he had a wide vocabulary of things to say and was choosing, again carefully, not to deploy them. On Naruto's other side, Sasuke had gone still in a different way. He was looking at the scoreboard, which hadn't posted the first matchup yet, and his jaw was doing the thing it did when he was thinking hard about something and not sharing it. Sakura was between them, watching the floor, and Naruto could tell from the set of her shoulders that she'd already run 3 different scenarios in her head about what the preliminary matchups might look like and was mentally preparing for all of them. The scoreboard clicked. First matchup, Sasuke Uchiha vs Yoroi Akato. Naruto watched the first fight from the balcony with the same focused attention he'd have given any intelligence-gathering situation, which was what it was. Yoroi's ability, chakra absorption through direct contact, was the kind of technique that should have been a serious problem for Sasuke. Should have been. What it actually was, in practice, was an opportunity for Sasuke to demonstrate that he could develop and execute a new solution in real time under pressure, which was a different and more valuable thing to watch. The fight was clean. Sasuke figured out the absorption issue fast, adjusted his approach, and finished it in a way that was technically sound and aesthetically uncomplicated. He walked back to the balcony with a small abrasion on his cheek and the expression of someone who just completed a task that was beneath his full investment. Naruto watched Kabuto watching Sasuke and felt the anti-magic give a small, quiet pull. Like a flag going up. Kabuto Yakushi was standing near the back of the observation balcony, hands in his pockets, wearing his mild-mannered medic expression with the practiced ease of a costume. He'd been helpful during the written exam, those cards, that performance, that careful cultivation of the harmless senior student persona. Looking at his chakra signature through the anti-magic's perception, Naruto saw something very different from harmless. The signature was controlled to a degree that was almost architectural, nothing leaking, nothing incidental, every current organized and suppressed, which required years of discipline and was exactly what someone who didn't want to be read would do. He added Kabuto to the list. The list was getting long. The scoreboard clicked again. Zaku Abumi vs Shino Aburame. Naruto watched this one more casually, leaning his forearms on the balcony railing. Shino's insects were fascinating through the anti-magic's perception. They carried chakra in their bodies the way all living things did, but the matriarch-guided coordination of the swarm created something that read almost like a single distributed system rather than thousands of separate ones. He wondered, briefly, what happened if anti-magic touched the swarm rather than a specific insect. Would the colony's shared chakra link break? Would the insects just become individual, independent organisms? He filed that one as a question for later. Not relevant today. Shino won. Efficiently and without visible effort, which seemed to be the Aburame way of doing everything. The scoreboard clicked. Kenkuro vs Misumi Tsurugi. Sand puppet master vs a taijutsu specialist who used chakra-reinforced joint dislocation. Kenkuro's puppet work was dense with chakra, every joint and mechanism running its own micro-technique, the control threads extending from Kenkuro's fingers like a web of small active jutsu. Naruto studied the architecture of it. The puppet itself was a chakra construct in the same way that sand armor was, not activated temporarily but continuously maintained. That was 2 sand shinobi now who ran permanent constructs. He wondered if it was a training philosophy or a village-wide tactical doctrine. Kenkuro won before it got interesting. Misumi tried to use the puppet as a point of entry and discovered that Kenkuro had planned for that exact approach, which suggested he'd done his research on the other competitors. Smart. Patient. The kind of opponent who was dangerous in proportion to how much time he'd had to prepare. The scoreboard clicked. Naruto Uzumaki vs Tsurugi Oki. He didn't know the name. Scanned the floor and found a boy dropping down from the opposite balcony, Rock Lee's team, Hidden Leaf, which meant this was one of Team Guy. Not Lee himself and not Niji, so the third one. Medium height, dark hair, the compact build of someone who trained physical fundamentals hard. His chakra signature was steady and technically clean, good control, no wasted output, which meant he'd been drilled properly. Naruto jumped the railing and landed on the floor with both feet, easy, and the room's ambient noise level dropped slightly in that particular way it dropped when people decided to pay attention. He was carrying the grimoire. He'd tucked it into his jacket on the left side, spine against his ribs, its warmth a constant presence. Proctor Hayate Gecko stood between them with his usual look of mild everything and said his piece about the rules and stepped back, and the fight started. Tsurugi came in with a taijutsu combination that was technically excellent, the Rock Lee school of pure body mechanics, no chakra enhancement during the strike sequence, the chakra held back for burst application at the moment of maximum extension. He was fast and precise and he hit Naruto twice in the first 15 seconds, clean strikes to the shoulder and the ribs that landed with full force because Naruto wasn't trying to avoid them. He was reading. 2 strikes was enough. The chakra pattern in Tsurugi's system, the way he loaded and released during burst application, the rhythm of it, the particular signature of that Rock Lee mechanical school, was clear to him now. He understood how this worked. The third strike came in and Naruto caught the fist. Not a grab. A flat palm intercept, the back of Tsurugi's knuckles against Naruto's open palm, and the burst application, the chakra release at point of impact that gave Rock Lee school strikes their bone-breaking force, died on contact. What remained was the physical punch, which was solid but absorbed. Tsurugi pulled back immediately, reassessing. He tried the next combination without burst application, pure physical, testing whether Naruto's interception was chakra-specific. It was. The strikes landed normally and Naruto moved with them rather than blocking, taking the angles out, redirecting rather than absorbing. Then Tsurugi tried a chakra-loaded kick to the side of the knee, low, practical, the kind of thing that ended fights, and Naruto stepped into it, coated his entire forearm in anti-magic, and took the leg across his forearm, bleeding the force and cancelling the chakra load simultaneously. Tsurugi's eyes narrowed. He wasn't frustrated, he was thinking, which Naruto respected. He went for a sealing technique. A contact seal on his palm, a paralysis type, short duration, designed to freeze the target's chakra system in place for about 10 seconds, which was enough for a clean follow-up. He faked with the right hand and came with the left and the seal hit Naruto's forearm. The anti-magic read it as chakra constructed. Because it was. Because a seal was, at its core, a shaped chakra pattern imposed on external reality. It dissolved. Just, dissolved. Tsurugi looked at his palm where the seal had been and there was nothing there and his expression cycled through a sequence of professional responses that ended at a kind of impressed resignation. Naruto stepped in and threw a punch. Plain, uncharged, purely physical. He was stronger than he looked, years of training that everyone underestimated because they'd spent so long assuming he was the dumb one, and it caught Tsurugi across the jaw at the right angle and put him down. Tsurugi sat on the floor for a moment with his hand to his jaw, doing the math. Then he looked up at Naruto. What was that thing you did? With the seal. Anti-magic, Naruto said. He offered a hand up. Tsurugi took it. Never heard of it. Most people haven't. He pulled Tsurugi to his feet. You're good. Technically solid. The burst application timing was perfect. Clearly not perfect enough, Tsurugi said, without bitterness. He rubbed his jaw. Are you going to do that to everyone? Probably, Naruto said, and walked back toward the balcony steps. The room's noise had a different texture now. He could feel it without looking, the recalibration happening in the heads of everyone who just watched the fight. The question moving through the room like weather. He didn't look up. He climbed the stairs and took his place on the balcony and the scoreboard clicked to the next matchup. Temari vs Tenten was fast and slightly brutal in the way that mismatched fights could be. Temari's wind techniques were large and decisive, and Tenten's weapon arsenal, impressive in other contexts, had no answer for the scale of what was coming at her. Naruto watched it with professional attention and registered two things. 1. Temari was methodical. She'd assessed Tenten's tools before deploying her response, which meant she was patient under pressure. 2. She carried herself with the particular quality of someone who expected to win, not arrogantly but structurally, in the way that Sasuke expected to win, like success was the default state and deviation from it was the anomaly. He also registered the way the Sand team's middle member, Gaara, watched his sisters fight. Which was to say he didn't. He stood at the balcony railing and looked at the combat floor with eyes that weren't processing the fight at all. They were processing something internal, something that had nothing to do with Tenten or Temari. The sand around his feet moved in slow, patient arcs, and the chakra construct that maintained it pulsed with each slow arc, perfectly synchronized. The anti-magic in Naruto's chest pulled toward it every time. Not aggressively, thoughtfully, the way a key turned toward a lock without forcing. Sakura appeared at his elbow. "You're staring at the Sand team. I'm reading their chakra." "You're staring," she said. "And Gaara has noticed." He looked. Gaara had turned his head slightly and his pale green eyes were on Naruto across the distance of the balcony. Not hostile. Not curious. The expression of someone looking at something they'd identified as relevant and were filing for later reference. Naruto held the look for a moment and then turned away. "What do you see?" Sakura asked quietly. "Gaara's sand is a permanent construct," he said. "It's not a jutsu he activates. It's running constantly. That means anti-magic won't treat it like a combat technique, I'd have to treat it like infrastructure. Like taking down a seal rather than blocking a strike." Sakura was quiet for a moment, running the medical implications. "That's more sustained output. For you, that means, more pathway strain, yeah." He shrugged. "I'll figure it out." "Will you figure it out before or after you damage your coils past the point where I can fix them in the field?" He looked at her. She looked back with the exact expression she used when she was done being gentle about something. "Before," he said. "I'll figure it out before." She held the look for another second. "Good." She turned back to the floor. "Because I'm not carrying you out of here." The scoreboard clicked. Rock Lee vs Gaara. The fight lasted 4 minutes and changed the texture of the room permanently. Naruto watched every second of it. Not for the anti-magic intelligence, though he gathered plenty of that, he watched it because it was the most honest thing he'd seen in years. Rock Lee, who had nothing. No ninjutsu, no genjutsu, chakra pathways that wouldn't run the standard techniques, just body, just training, just the absolute refusal to accept the conclusion that people without natural advantages were supposed to accept quietly. And for 3 minutes he was winning. Actually winning. The speed that came out of him when the weights came off was something that had no category, it exceeded what human legs were supposed to generate, and the room felt it, the collective intake of breath, the sudden silence of people watching something unprecedented. And then the sand caught him anyway. Naruto watched Gaara's face during those final moments and felt the anti-magic reading the construct's response pattern like a text. The sand didn't operate on conscious direction during the defense, it operated on something more automatic, an instinct layer, responding to threat input before Gaara processed it consciously. Which meant the construct was partially autonomous. Which meant it was deep integrated, the deepest kind of seal work, something that had been running so long it had become structural. Lee hit the ground in a way that bodies weren't supposed to hit the ground. Gai-sensei was over the railing before the dust settled and the room had the particular silence of witnesses, the kind that followed things that couldn't be taken back. Naruto said nothing. He looked at Gaara, who was looking at his own sand with the expression of someone reading a report about someone they didn't know, and filed everything the anti-magic had shown him. He could do it. He knew how now. It would cost. He could do it anyway. The subsequent fights processed through the afternoon. Naruto watched each one with dual attention, following the action as action, and reading chakra through the anti-magic's perception, building a comprehensive picture of every competitor still in the room. Shikamaru's shadow technique was elegant in its architecture, a contact expansion construct that spread along the ground rather than through the air. Ino's mind transfer jutsu was the most unusual signature in the room, a projection technique, chakra leaving the body entirely and operating at range, which was genuinely rare. Hinata's gentle fist was close to what Niji used, the same Hyuga pathway strike system, but softer in its surface presentation. The intention behind the strikes was different, less about destruction, more about, he wasn't sure. Something else. The second-to-last matchup on the afternoon card was his second fight. Naruto vs. Dosu Kinyuta. The sound genin with the sound amplification weapon on his arm was the most technically sophisticated opponent he'd faced today. Dosu's technique wasn't a simple jutsu but a continuous resonance system, the metal device on his arm vibrating at a frequency that disrupted inner ear function and chakra flow simultaneously. Smart design. The disruption to chakra flow was the real danger. It interfered with chakra control at the fine level, making precise technique impossible, which was how Dosu had been neutralizing opponents throughout the exam. Dosu came down to the floor with his usual unhurried pace and looked at Naruto with the flat assessment of a professional. Behind the bandaged face, the eyes were analytical. He'd watched Naruto's earlier fight. He'd seen the anti-magic work at contact range. He would have been stupid not to keep his distance, and Dosu was clearly not stupid. Proctor Hayate did his thing and stepped back. Dosu activated the arm weapon immediately, before closing any distance, which was exactly right. The resonance hit Naruto at 6 meters and the disruption moved through his system. The Kyuubi's chakra lurched, the anti-magic pushed back against the interference, and for a moment the two forces grinding against each other and the external disruption were all happening simultaneously, and Naruto's chakra control went approximately sideways. He lost his footing for a second, stumbled, caught himself on one knee. The room read that as damage. A point to Dosu. Naruto stayed on one knee for a moment longer and let the anti-magic do what it did when given time: assess, locate, understand. The resonance was a constructed frequency. Not chakra itself, but chakra maintained, the way a sound could be maintained by breath. The device ran on chakra input from Dosu's arm. The resonance was the output. To stop the resonance he didn't need to touch Dosu, he needed to touch the chakra input. The device was channeling chakra at range. The anti-magic could reach chakra at range. Naruto stood up. He extended his left arm with his palm forward and pushed the negation depth outward from his hand, not a full pulse, not the uncontrolled explosion from the forest. Directed. Focused. A stream rather than a burst, narrow and precise, aimed at the device on Dosu's arm from 6 meters away, targeted at the chakra channel rather than the physical metal. The device went quiet. Not broke, the metal was still there, intact. But the chakra input that powered the resonance was gone. Cut. Negated at the channel point. Without the chakra input the resonance was just vibrating metal, and vibrating metal at that frequency was unpleasant but not a jutsu. Dosu looked at his arm. He understood immediately. It was one of the things Naruto was coming to appreciate about the sound genin, the speed of their analysis. He tried to reinitialize the chakra channel and Naruto held the negation stream steady and the reinitiation failed. Tried again. Failed again. I can do this all day, Naruto said. Or you can close the distance and we can do this the physical way, which ends the same but faster. Dosu looked at him for a moment. Then looked at his arm. Then made a decision and charged. It was a good charge, committed, no hesitation, angle of approach designed to get the arm into contact range as fast as possible so the resonance could operate. Naruto met him halfway and took the arm contact when it came. The resonance hit him again at close range, disrupting his system hard enough to make his vision blur, and grabbed the device with both hands. Both hands. Full contact. both palms running the maximum anti-magic he could push through physical contact. The chakra infrastructure of the sound device dissolved in about 2 seconds. Not the metal. Not the mechanism. The chakra work that made it a jutsu rather than a tool. It became inert. A piece of metal on a person's arm. Naruto headbutt Dosu. It was inelegant and his head hurt afterward, but it was effective and Dosu went down. The room was very quiet. Naruto straightened, rubbed his forehead, and looked at the scoreboard. His name with a win next to it. He looked at Dosu, who was sitting on the floor looking at the inert device on his arm with an expression that was somewhere between professional defeat and genuine fascination. The chakra architecture in that device was impressive, Naruto said. Whoever designed it knew what they were doing. Dosu looked up at him. Orochimaru-sama, he said, without inflection. Yeah, Naruto said. I figured. He walked back to the balcony stairs. The last matchup of the day was Niji Hyuga versus Hinata Hyuga, and Naruto stayed for every second of it, and the thing that struck him most wasn't the technique, which was exceptional, but the philosophy. Niji's Byakugan was the clearest possible version of something the anti-magic had been telling him obliquely since he found the grimoire, that the best offense against a system was understanding its architecture. Niji read Hinata's chakra pathways like sheet music and played against them precisely, closing her tenketsu, methodically removing her ability to function rather than simply defeating her. It was wrong what he was doing. Not tactically wrong, it was technically perfect. Humanly wrong, in the specific way that things were wrong when the technical answer came at the cost of something that mattered more than the technical answer. Naruto called down from the balcony before Proctor Hay-8 could end it officially, and Niji looked up at him from the floor, and Naruto said what he said, and Niji went very still in the way precise people went still when something landed in their system and they needed time to process it. Hinata was taken off the floor by medics. Naruto watched her go and felt something tighten in his chest that had nothing to do with the anti-magic, something older, smaller, the particular ache of recognizing someone who'd been trying to prove themselves to a world that had already decided what they were. Niji climbed to the balcony's floor level and stopped beside Naruto without looking at him. He was looking at the floor where Hinata had been. You have something to say, Niji said. I said it. You called down from the balcony like someone who was watching a person beat up their cousin for points, Naruto said. Yeah. Niji's jaw tightened. You don't understand the Hyuga clan. You don't understand fate or, I understand that she came down to that floor and fought you anyway, Naruto said. Knowing she was going to lose. Knowing you'd do exactly what you did. She came down anyway. He looked at the spot on the floor. That's not fate. That's choice. Niji said nothing. His pale eyes were fixed on the middle distance and the Byakugan-adjacent clarity in them was doing something complicated. We might fight in the finals, Naruto said. When that happens I'm going to beat you. Not because of destiny or whatever. Because I'm going to. He said it the same way he'd said everything else about anti-magic, simply, certainly, as a fact that had already been decided. So be ready. Niji turned to look at him. The expression on his face was the expression of a person being handed something they hadn't asked for and discovering they couldn't put it back down. You're very confident for someone with a secondary energy system that's destabilizing their chakra pathways, Niji said. I'm confident for someone whose energy system just quietly dismantled 2 of your village's genin today, Naruto said pleasantly. Niji stared at him for another moment. Then turned and walked away, and the line of his shoulders was different from the way they'd been when the day started. Still rigid. But differently rigid. The rigidity of someone who'd had a question inserted into a structure they'd thought was load-bearing, and was now not entirely sure. Evening. The tower's rest area, which was stone bunks and very little else, but it was warm and it was quiet. Sakura had already commandeered the space near the window and was writing notes in the small medical log she kept, observations about the fights, probably, injuries and techniques cross-referenced against possible treatments. Sasuke was sitting with his back to the wall opposite the door in the position he always chose, the one that covered the entrance and the window simultaneously, and he had his eyes closed but he wasn't sleeping. Naruto sat cross-legged on his bunk with the grimoire open and tried to listen to what it was telling him and kept getting distracted. The Kyuubi had been present all day in the low background way it was when it was engaged, following the fights through Naruto's senses, processing the chakra data, building its own understanding of the competition. It hadn't spoken. Now, in the quiet, the Hyuga boy can see you. I know, Naruto said silently. More clearly than anyone else here. He reads chakra architecture. He saw the negation depth. I know. He also saw the damage from the forest. The micro-tears in your chest pathways. He saw that too. Naruto paused. He hadn't considered that. He looked down at his own chest reflexively, as though he could see through to the pathway system beneath. Is it worse than Sakura thought? It's exactly what Sakura thought. A pause. She understated it to avoid worrying you. Of course she did. He exhaled. I need to fix the pulse control. You need to do more than that. The Kyuubi's voice was, not gentle exactly. The Kyuubi was constitutionally incapable of gentle. But measured. My chakra accelerates physical healing. You know this. If you would allow a controlled release, into the damaged areas? Yes. You've never offered that before. You've never needed it before. Another pause, longer. And I've never been in a shared system with a force that would kill me if the host dies before I can be extracted. It's an incentive. Naruto almost laughed. It came out as a quiet exhale that Sasuke opened one eye for, registered as non-threatening, and closed again. All right, Naruto said internally. Controlled release. Small. The Kyuubi's chakra moved through the chest pathways carefully, genuinely carefully, with a precision that Naruto had never felt from it before, like watching a large animal move through a confined space with deliberate, considered steps. It found the micro-tears and worked through them slowly, the red-gold healing warmth of it familiar and strange at the same time in this new context, the anti-magic watching from the parallel layer with the attention of something that was evaluating whether to interfere and deciding not to. When it was done, 5 minutes later, Sakura said from her window without looking up from her notes, your chakra signature just changed. Getting some maintenance done, Naruto said. She looked up. Looked at him with the medic's full attention. Then, is the damage to the chest pathways better? Yeah. The Kyuubi? Yeah. She was quiet for a moment, processing this development, the Kyuubi providing targeted healing, the anti-magic allowing it, the three-way system that should have been self-destructing managing instead to find a working arrangement. He could see her building a new model in her head, replacing the previous alarming one with something more nuanced. Okay, she said. Good. She went back to her notes. Sasuke opened both eyes this time. He looked at Naruto across the room with the full weight of his attention, which was substantial. You're going to fight Neji in the finals. Probably. He's going to be reading your pathways during the fight. The Byakugan, I know what the Byakugan does, Naruto said. Then you know he can target the damaged area specifically. Hit the chest pathways directly and the combination of physical damage and chakra disruption, Sasuke. Naruto looked at him. I know. I'm handling it. Sasuke held the look. I know you are, he said, finally. Simply. And went back to sitting with his eyes closed. Naruto looked at him for a moment, then looked at the grimoire. The script was moving again, new section, late night delivery, the kind of knowledge that arrived when the rest of the world was quiet enough to let it through. He read it carefully, turning pages, letting the meaning arrive in that wordless direct way, and found what he was looking for around midnight. The section on permanent constructs. Infrastructure jutsu. The kind of anti-magic application required to dismantle something that had been running for years rather than seconds. It was going to require him to hold the negation depth at a level he hadn't sustained before. Not a burst, not a stream, a sustained full-surface engagement, both arms, both hands, every available pathway coded and active, for long enough to work through the layers of a deep integrated construct. The chest pathways needed to be solid for that. He'd known that. The Kyuubi's targeted healing had just become strategically necessary rather than optional, which meant the Kyuubi had also known that. He looked at the inside of his own head, at the vast dark space where the cage stood in a half-metaphor of his consciousness, and said, "You were going to offer that anyway, weren't you? The healing. Even before I needed the pulse control for Gaara." The Kyuubi said nothing. "Because you read the Grimoires section on permanent constructs 2 weeks ago, and you knew I'd need to take down Gaara's sand, and you knew I'd need the pathways solid to do it." A very long silence. Then, without a trace of admission, "Get some sleep." Naruto closed the grimoire and lay back on his bunk and looked at the stone ceiling and felt the complicated, grinding, reluctant partnership of his two impossible powers settling into their nightly configuration, pushing against each other, balanced exactly, holding. Outside, the village was a month away. The final tournament was a month away. From somewhere in the deep forest to the east, a chakra signature that the anti-magic had memorized from a wrist grab in the trees pulsed once, steady and patient, like a clock keeping time. Naruto closed his eyes. He was ready. Chapter 4, the tournament begins. The month between the preliminaries and the finals moved the way months moved when you were training towards something, fast in the days and slow in the hours, the kind of time that felt simultaneously insufficient and endless. Konoha had a different quality to it in that month. The streets were fuller, the market stalls more elaborate, the general noise level elevated in the way cities got when they were performing for an audience. Dignitaries from every major village moved through the gates in careful processions. The Hokage's office ran at double its usual pace. Even the ramen stand had a new menu board with prices Naruto found personally insulting. He trained through all of it. The grimoire had given him 3 things to work on and he worked on all 3 simultaneously, rotating through them the way you rotated muscle groups, giving each the attention it needed without letting the others atrophy. The negation pulse, controlled this time, the compression and release cycle practiced at increments, starting at 2 meters and working outward, finding the threshold where his chest pathways could sustain the output without tearing. The sustained full-surface engagement for infrastructure work, held for increasing durations, the Kyuubi's targeted healing running as a support function beneath it like a spotter. And the directional stream, the focused output application he'd used against Dosu, refined now to the point where he could put it through a single fingertip with surgical accuracy. He also trained with his team, which was a different and equally necessary exercise. Kakashi had stopped pretending to read his book during training sessions. He sat on the log and watched with open attention and said very little, which was either his version of approval or his version of concern, and the difference was genuinely hard to distinguish. After the 3rd week he started bringing scrolls, not his usual literature, but old technical texts, pre-village era materials that he'd pulled from somewhere, and he'd read them during the lunch breaks and occasionally say things like, and interesting, and once, memorably, well that explains several things. What explains several things? Naruto had asked. The grimoire's classification in pre-village records, Kakashi said, without looking up from the scroll. It's listed as an outsider artifact. The term refers to objects that didn't originate within the chakra world's physical laws. They appear periodically, usually in sealed sites like the one you found. Usually they choose a host and become inaccessible to everyone else. You could have told me this 3 weeks ago. I only found the records 2 days ago. Kakashi turned a page. Also I wanted to watch you figure out the practical application before I introduce theory that might influence your approach. Fresh methodology is often more efficient than inherited technique. Naruto stared at him. You're the worst. You're welcome, Kakashi said serenely. Sasuke had been doing his own research through the month, in the way Sasuke did research, alone, in the clan library, at hours that suggested he was sleeping less than was probably wise, emerging with the particular focused energy of someone who'd found something they couldn't let go of. He didn't share what he found. But in the second week, during a team spar, he came at Naruto with a taijutsu combination that was specifically designed to avoid hand contact, all elbow and knee strikes, no palm, no wrist, nothing that gave a flat surface contact point. Which meant he'd been analyzing how the anti-magic required physical contact and was practicing ways to fight around it. Naruto had appreciated that. It was the most honest thing Sasuke could have said without saying anything. "You're accounting for my range," Naruto said, after the spar. "I'm accounting for what's in front of me," Sasuke said. Standard non-answer. But his eyes said something different, something that had been building across the whole month, the slow accumulation of a feeling that Naruto had watched develop without pushing it. Sasuke was reckoning with something. That was the word for it. Not fear, not jealousy, reckoning. The hard internal work of someone rewriting a fundamental belief about the shape of things. Naruto let him do it at his own pace. It would arrive when it arrived. The morning of the finals came in the particular quality of a late summer day when the heat was already committed before sunrise. Naruto was awake before dawn, sitting on the roof of his apartment building with the grimoire open in his lap, watching the sky change color and doing nothing at all except being present in the moment, which was an extremely unusual experience for him and which the grimoire had been quietly encouraging for the last week. The negation depth responds to the host state, it had told him through its wordless delivery. Agitation creates turbulence in the parallel layer. Turbulence reduces precision. Precision is what the permanent construct work requires. "So you want me to be calm," he'd said. "I want you to be ready. Calm is one path to ready." He'd been practicing that too. It didn't come naturally, he was, constitutionally, someone who arrived at readiness through energy and volume and forward motion. But there was a version of readiness that was different from energy, and the grimoire had been teaching him its shape. Still water was still moving. Still water could flood anything. The sun came up over Konoha and the city woke in sections, light moving through the streets in a progression from the eastern gates inward. Naruto watched it and felt the anti-magic settle into its working configuration, the negation depth at the surface, both arms ready, the Kyuubi's chakra running clean and low beneath it, the complicated grinding balance of the two forces holding at a level that felt almost comfortable now, the way you got comfortable with something that never stopped being challenging. He put the grimoire in his jacket. Closed his eyes for one moment. Opened them. Then he jumped off the roof and headed for the arena. The stadium was enormous in a way that hit differently when it was full. Naruto had been in the arena district before, everyone had, it was part of Konoha's geography, but the stands filled with thousands of people from a dozen villages changed the acoustic quality of the space entirely. The noise had mass. It pressed against the skin the way heat did. He found the competitors' area and took his spot among the remaining finalists. The faces around him were the faces from the preliminary balcony, familiar now through a month of existing in the same preparation space, some of them he'd trained near, some he'd spoken to, all of them he'd read through the anti-magic's perception until he knew their chakra signatures the way he knew the layout of the village. Gaara was across the competitor's area with his arms crossed and his hand moving in its slow patient arcs and his eyes fixed on nothing in particular. Naruto had looked at him in the preliminary room and looked at him now, and in the month between those two moments his understanding of what he was seeing had changed significantly. The permanent construct running around Gaara wasn't just a defense system. It was a life support system. The sand armor, the automatic response, the constant cycling, it was the only thing standing between whatever was inside Gaara and the world, and the only thing standing between the world and whatever was inside Gaara. Dismantling it required care that had nothing to do with competition. Neji was nearby, standing with his usual quality of coiled stillness, and when Naruto arrived he looked over with those pale eyes and did a fast pathway read. Naruto let him. The chest pathways were solid, 3 weeks of Kyuubi-assisted healing and careful training had restored them fully and then some, the targeted repair having strengthened the surrounding pathway tissue as a secondary effect. He watched Neji register this and watched the calculation behind the pale eyes update accordingly. "Your pathways are clear," Neji said. Told you I was handling it. Niji said nothing. Looked forward again. Then, quietly, with the careful reluctance of a person saying something they'd argued themselves out of several times before finally saying it, the girl. Hinata. She's been training. Naruto looked at him. After the preliminary round. She resumed training the day after she was released from the medical ward. Niji's voice was completely flat. He was reporting facts. I was informed by our clan's training supervisor. I was not, another pause, I was not aware she would do that. Because you thought she'd quit, Naruto said. Because I assessed her limits accurately based on current performance metrics and, he stopped. Yes, he said, after a moment. Because I thought she'd quit. People who are told they don't have a choice tend to make one anyway, Naruto said. Funny how that works. Niji turned to look at him. The expression on his face was doing something complex and private. You speak as though you understand her situation. I understand being the person everyone decided about before they met you, Naruto said. The noise of the stadium was a constant roar around them. Somewhere in the stands, above the competitors' area, he could feel chakra signatures, Team 7's, Kakashi's particular silver cool signature and Sakura's precise, controlled one. He felt Gaara's construct pulse. He felt the ambient signatures of thousands of civilians who didn't know they were broadcasting. And from the dignitary's box, high above the arena floor, one signature that had become as recognizable as a voice. Patient. Dense. Old. Watching. Naruto looked up and found the box and found the face, pale, dark-robed, wearing the Kazekage's hat and robes with the particular stillness of a costume and not a role, beside the Hokage who sat with his pipe and his age and the particular sadness of a man who had made himself responsible for too many things. The anti-magic pulled. Hard. Naruto held it. Not yet. The first fight of the finals was Naruto versus Niji. The bracket had delivered it as the opening bout, which made a certain dramatic sense that Naruto appreciated without feeling anything in particular about. He walked down to the floor and the crowd noise shifted, not louder exactly, but denser, the sound of thousands of people deciding simultaneously to pay attention. Niji walked down the opposite path with the Hyuga school's walking quality, controlled, precise, chin slightly down to keep the Byakugan's range maximized without looking threatening about it. They met in the center of the arena floor and Proctor Hayate stood between them and the whole ritual played out and then it was just the two of them with the stadium around them and the sky overhead and whatever was about to happen. Niji activated the Byakugan. The veins around his eyes came up and the pale eyes went white and Naruto felt the perception sweep over him like a searchlight, comprehensive, deep, reading every pathway in his system simultaneously. He held still and let it happen. He had nothing to hide and concealing it would have wasted energy. You've been healing the chest pathways, Niji said. With the Kyuubi's chakra. Yep. They're stronger than the surrounding tissue now. The secondary healing effect. He sounded almost annoyed about this. I can't target the damaged areas because they're not damaged anymore. That's the idea. You planned this. The Kyuubi planned it, actually, Naruto said. I just agreed. Niji's eyes narrowed slightly. Then he moved. Gentle fist at full Hyuga commitment was a different thing from what Naruto had seen in the preliminary against Hinata. This was against someone Niji considered a real opponent, which meant the full architecture came out, the 8 trigrams positioning, the angular footwork that controlled the space between them, the strikes calibrated to hit tenketsu in sequences designed to progressively shut down chakra output. It was precise and it was fast and it was built on the assumption that what made it work, the ability to read the target's chakra pathways in real time, would continue to work. Naruto coated his arms in anti-magic and went in. The first strike sequence Niji threw was a textbook 8 trigrams opening, for strikes timed to hit the forearm tenketsu and reduce hand technique chakra output. Naruto took them on his anti-magic coated forearms and felt the tenketsu strikes land against the negation field and simply stop. The precision of Gentle Fist depended on the chakra running through the target's pathways being accessible to disruption. Anti-magic made his pathways non-functional as targets, not closed, not blocked, but running in a parallel layer that Gentle Fist's mechanism couldn't reach. Niji pulled back 2 steps. Read the pathways again. Made a fast adjustment. He went for physical strikes instead, abandoning the Tenketsu targeting and using the Gentle Fist frame as a pure taijutsu system, the footwork and positioning without the chakra disruption application. Which was smart. Smart and harder than it sounded because Gentle Fist practitioners trained the chakra application so deeply that isolating the physical components was like writing with your non-dominant hand. Naruto met him in that space, physical against physical, no chakra amplification on either side, and it was genuinely hard. Niji was faster in pure physical terms than Sasuke, which Naruto hadn't fully registered during the preliminary observation. The Hyuga footwork created angles that were hard to track, the strikes coming from directions that weren't where you'd started tracking them, and twice Naruto took clean hits to the ribs that had nothing behind them except mass and velocity and were still substantial. But Naruto was stronger than Niji had apparently planned for. 3 exchanges in, Niji went for a circular redirect, catching Naruto's incoming strike and using the momentum to create an opening, and Naruto let the redirect happen and used the rotating motion to bring his coated palm flat against Niji's shoulder in a full-contact anti-magic application. He didn't put everything through it. He used exactly enough. The chakra architecture in Niji's shoulder, the network supporting that arm's Gentle Fist application, went quiet. Not the whole system. Just the arm. Precise, targeted, the surgical version of what he'd used against the Sound and Rain teams. Niji stepped back and raised that arm and the Byakugan read it and his expression changed, not panic, the Hyuga never panicked visibly, but a rapid reassessment that moved through his features like weather on a fast timeline. 30 seconds, Naruto said. Then it comes back. Niji looked at him. I could have taken the whole system, Naruto said. I didn't. I know how long 30 seconds is in a fight. He tilted his head. I'm giving you the choice. Yield or continue. Either way is fine. Niji stared at him. The veined eyes reading his pathways, reading the anti-magic running alongside them, reading whatever the Byakugan could read in the posture and muscle tension and chakra state of the person across from him. Then, and Naruto watched this happen the way you watched something important happen, slowly and with attention, Niji's shoulders changed. The rigid quality, the weight-bearing rigidity he'd carried since the preliminary, shifted. Not collapsed. Changed quality. The kind of change that happened when a load was redistributed rather than dropped. I yield, Niji said. Clearly. Not quietly, not grudgingly. He said it like a fact. The stadium made a noise that was its own kind of weather. Naruto reached out and pressed his palm briefly against Niji's shoulder again, same contact point, different direction, a small deliberate current of anti-magic carrying a slightly different charge, the negation depth used as a reset rather than a disruption. The chakra architecture came back online 10 seconds early. Niji looked at his arm. Looked at Naruto. I don't fully understand what you are, Niji said. Most people don't, Naruto said. I'm still working on it myself. He walked back toward the competitors' area. The stadium's noise had a different quality now, not the noise of surprise, not the noise of seeing something unbelievable. The noise of people adjusting their assessment of what was possible. That was a different sound. He'd never heard it directed at himself before and it felt strange in a way that took him a few seconds to identify. It felt like being seen. The bracket moved forward. Shikamaru's fight against Temari produced something that the stadium seemed incapable of processing, the spectacle of a clearly superior tactician conceding to an opponent he could have beaten because he'd run his own probability calculations and decided victory wasn't worth the cost. Naruto watched it with appreciation. Shikamaru was doing something in that arena that looked like giving up and was actually the opposite. Gaara's fight was next. His opponent was from the Rain team, a substitute who'd replaced a preliminary finalist who'd withdrawn due to injury. He lasted 40 seconds. The sand moved before he'd completed his first hand seals, and it was over before anyone in the stands had fully settled into watching. Gaara stood in the aftermath with the sand cycling back and his expression unchanged, and Naruto watched the permanent construct pulse and resettle with the negation depth's full attention. He could feel it better now, having watched it work in a fight context. The automation layer, the part that responded to threat input before conscious direction, ran at a frequency he could now identify distinctly. It was like a heartbeat, almost. Regular. Consistent. The anti-magic had spent a month cataloging it every time Naruto was in proximity, and the catalog was complete now, and what it told him was this: the construct's automation layer ran on a chakra signature that was distinct from Gaara's intentional output. Two sources. Gaara's chakra, yes, but also something else. Something older, denser, the particular quality of a chakra signature that had spent years compressed inside a person and had developed its own character. He knew what that was. He looked at Gaara across the competitor's area, and Gaara looked back, and the recognition was mutual this time, not worn, nothing like worn, but real. The recognition of two people who were carrying something that nobody else in the arena could quite comprehend, standing in a space that was too loud and too public for the kind of thing they were actually looking at each other about. Naruto looked away first. Not from discomfort. From priority. He had a fight to prepare for. His second fight of the day was against Gaara, and the stadium had somehow gotten louder since the morning. The competitors' area emptied around them as the bracket progressed, and by the time the scoreboard clicked their names together, the stands were at maximum capacity and the dignitaries' box was full, and the Kage were in their seats, and somewhere in the crowd Kakashi and Sakura were watching, and somewhere in the secure observation point Sasuke was there too, because he was Sasuke and he would have arranged to be there regardless of what the logistics required. Naruto walked to the floor. Gaara walked to the floor. They stood across from each other, and the noise of the stadium became a physical thing. Naruto could feel it against his skin, and the sand moved around Gaara in its slow patient arcs, and the negation depth pulsed against the construct's chakra signature in the way it had been doing for a month, familiar now, mapped. Heiei began the preamble. Naruto looked at Gaara and Gaara looked at Naruto, and somewhere beneath the pale green eyes and the tattooed kanji and the sand and the permanent construct and all the years of what those things represented, Naruto saw a person who was exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with the current day. The particular exhaustion of someone who had never once in their life felt safe. He recognized it because he'd worn it too, for years, before he'd learned to put it somewhere else. He didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say yet. The fight came first. Heiei stepped back. The sand came immediately, not a gradual build, not a test probe, the full deployment of everything at once, which told Naruto that Gaara had also been watching, also been preparing, and had decided that the most dangerous thing he'd seen in a month of observation was someone with the patience to wait. The sand moved in a sweeping column that would have hit Naruto like a wall and carried him into the barrier at the stadium's edge. Naruto raised both arms. He'd been building the sustained full-surface engagement for 3 weeks, holding it at increasing durations, with the Kyuubi's chakra running support beneath it. He'd reached the point where he could hold it for approximately 4 minutes at full capacity before the pathway strain became structural. 4 minutes was a very long time in a fight at this level. The sand hit the negation field at arm's length and the wavefront dissolved. Not all of it. The sheer volume of the construct was larger than a single forward field could address, but the leading edge, the compressed attack formation, came apart grain by grain as each particle's chakra bond was negated and they became just sand, landing at Naruto's feet in a small dune of completely inert material. The stadium went quiet. Gaara's expression changed for the first time. The sand pulled back, regrouped, came again, different angle, wider spread, trying to get around the forward field. Naruto turned, tracking the largest concentration, keeping the full surface engagement running and letting it address what it could address and stepping away from what it couldn't. Sand hit his shoulder and one arm, not the negated portions, the physical sand, which was just weight and impact and manageable. He kept moving, kept the field active, and pressed forward. Closing distance against Gaara was what the sand was designed to prevent. Every step forward he took cost something. The sand was everywhere, building around his feet, the automatic defense layer responding to the threat input of his approach by constructing barriers, ground traps, walls of compressed sand that required the full surface field to clear. He was working through it the way you work through deep water, not fast but continuous, the negation depth dismantling each constructed barrier as he reached it. Gaara was pulling more chakra from the other source. Naruto could feel it, the denser, older signature rising to reinforce the construct, the thing inside Gaara responding to a threat level it hadn't encountered before. The sand became heavier, faster, more aggressive. Naruto hit the 2-minute mark and pushed the full surface engagement to maximum. What had been invisible became visible. Not to the naked eye, but to anyone with chakra perception, Neji in the stands, Kakashi in the observation area, the other sensor-type shinobi scattered through the crowd, the anti-magic bloomed outward from Naruto's body in a field that was the deep, light-eating black of the grimoire's pages, a visible absence, and where it touched the sand the sand fell. Not dramatically. Quietly. Grain by grain, the chakra bonds dissolving, the permanent construct's infrastructure being dismantled from the outside in, the automatic defense layer trying to rebuild faster than the negation field could dismantle it. For 30 seconds it was a genuine competition, the construct's regeneration rate versus the negation field's dismantling rate, and the stadium was silent in the way that meant nobody was breathing. The negation field won. Not because it was more powerful. Because of where Naruto aimed it. He'd spent a month learning the construct's architecture and he knew which load-bearing structures supported the rest, the anchor points where the chakra bonds were densest, where the construct's cohesion originated. He hit those specifically, and when the anchor points dissolved the rest of the construct didn't fall apart all at once. It just stopped regenerating. The existing sand fell where it was, inert, Gaara suddenly standing in a pile of completely normal desert sand that wasn't listening to him anymore. The other chakra signature, the older, denser one, surged. Gaara's sand armor began to form. Not the construct's automation, Gaara's conscious application of chakra to his own body, building a different kind of defense in response to losing the first one. Naruto was 3 meters away now and he kept moving forward. "Stop," Gaara said. Naruto stopped. Not because of the word. Because of the voice. He'd expected the flat effect, the clinical disconnect. What he heard instead was something raw beneath it, something that had been protected by the construct and was now standing without it. He dropped the full surface engagement. The black field receded. The negation depth pulled back to its working level and Naruto stood there with both arms at his sides, the Kyuubi's chakra warm and available beneath the surface, and looked at Gaara across 3 meters of inert sand. Gaara's sand armor was half-formed. His hands were raised. The older chakra signature was still pushing, urgent, confused by the loss of its primary expression. "I know what's inside you," Naruto said. "I've got one too." Gaara stared at him. "Not the same kind," Naruto said. "But the same situation. Something that isn't you that everyone decided was the definition of you." He looked at the inert sand around them. "The sand was the only thing that ever protected you, right? When you were a kid. The only thing that answered when you called." Gaara's half-formed armor held. "I'm not here to take that from you," Naruto said. "I'm here to fight you in a tournament. So." He raised his right hand, palm forward, the anti-magic visible at the surface. "Either finish the armor and come at me, or yield. Both are fine." The stadium was still completely silent. Gaara looked at his hands. At the half-formed armor. At the inert sand that had been his primary self-expression since childhood, currently just minerals on a stone floor. He looked at Naruto. "You dissolved it," Gaara said. His voice had an unfamiliar quality, not the flat effect, something underneath the flat effect, something that was finding its way out through a crack that hadn't been there an hour ago. "Temporarily," Naruto said. "The construct can be rebuilt. Give it a week, let the chakra bonds re-establish at the anchor points. It'll come back. He paused. It's not gone. Just resting. He didn't know if that was true. The grimoire hadn't specified permanence in either direction for infrastructure work. But he believed it, which was close enough for now. Gaara's hands lowered. The half-formed armor receded. I yield, Gaara said, in the voice of someone saying something for the first time in their life. The stadium exploded with noise. Naruto exhaled. Long and steady, pushing the sustained engagement's residual tension out through the breath. The pathway strain was real, not structural, but present. The 4-minute line was a line he'd come close to. He pressed his palm to his chest and felt the Kyuubi's chakra move into the supporting function automatically, without prompting. From the dignitary's box, high above, the pale-robed figure of what was not the Kazekage watched the arena floor with an expression that nobody near him could fully read. Not fury. Not defeat. Something more considered than both. The expression of someone who had just updated a very important calculation. The scoreboard put Naruto's name beside a win. Below the grimoire entry in his jacket, his heart was running fast and steady. Between his fights, standing at the competitor's entrance with the stadium noise above him and the stone cool of the tunnel around him, Naruto heard it begin. Not from outside, from the dignitary's box, through the chakra perception. A signature going active. 2 signatures. The particular quality of a plan moving from prepared to executing. The grimoire went hot. He had his hand inside his jacket on the cover before he'd consciously processed the alarm, and the knowledge arrived immediately. Now, it's happening now, and from somewhere in the upper stands he heard a sound that didn't belong at a tournament. The invasion had started early. He heard Kakashi's chakra signature spike into combat mode. Heard Sakura's shift into active defense. Heard, distantly and unmistakably, the voice of something very large and very old activating in the sealed summoning space beneath the arena's exterior. The sand had brought the Shikaku. Naruto looked up at the stone ceiling of the tunnel and laughed. Not from humor, from the kind of recognition that came when a situation confirmed exactly what you'd been preparing for. He looked at the grimoire's hot cover. I know, he told it. I know who's up there. He stepped back into the arena. Chapter 5, Devil's Spiral. The invasion hit Konoha the way storms hit, not with a single dramatic moment but with a progression, the pressure building and then suddenly everything at once. Naruto came up out of the competitor's tunnel and the arena was chaos in layers. The civilian audience scrambling for exits under the spreading genjutsu that had hit the stands, an enormous, architectural sleep technique that covered the entire stadium and radiated outward into the surrounding streets, dropping non-shinobi where they stood. Sand and sound shinobi appearing from beneath the stands, from the exits, from positions they'd held for hours under concealment jutsu. Konoha Jonin moving to intercept them with the organized urgency of people executing a response plan they'd hoped never to need. Above it all, the signature from the dignitary's box had moved. Naruto tracked it through the anti-magic's perception and found it on the roof of the arena's eastern tower, the Hokage and what wasn't the Kazekage, separated from the chaos below by a barrier that had gone up the moment the invasion started. A crystalline dome of chakra-constructed glass, airtight, impenetrable by conventional means, the kind of seal work that took years of preparation to set and was designed to ensure that whatever happened inside it stayed inside it. Orochimaru had planned this comprehensively. The barrier protected the most important fight and isolated the most important target simultaneously. Very clean. Very patient. Naruto was already moving toward the eastern tower. The arena floor was combat geometry now, shinobi and sound ninja trading techniques in the stone-walled space, jutsu lighting the air in brief violent colors, the sleep genjutsu above making the crowd's absence feel enormous. He moved through it the way water moved through a crowded space, finding the gaps, his anti-magic at working level, not full deployment, he needed his capacity for what was above. When a sound ninja swung a sound amplification palm strike at him from the right, Naruto ducked under it and caught the wrist on the way past and the technique died and he kept moving without stopping. When a sand clone construct blocked the path to the tower stairs, he walked through it with the field active and the clone dissolved, and he was on the stairs before the dust cleared. Behind him somewhere, he heard Sakura's voice, controlled, focused, medical commands mixed with the sharp sounds of active defense. He heard Gai-sensei's students moving in coordinated team patterns. He heard the village responding, which was what Konoha did when it was threatened, not cleanly, not without cost, but with the weight of people who had built something together and intended to keep it. The stairwell was empty. He took it fast. The barrier was visible from the top of the stairs, a dome about 20 meters across sitting on the tower's roof platform, the inside faintly visible through the chakra crystal construction, 2 figures within it. The Hokage, the old man's pipe still somehow present, his robes different now, the weight of what he was about to do visible in every line of his posture. And Orochimaru, with his back to the dome's wall, wearing the Kazekage's robes like a discarded joke, smiling the smile that Naruto had seen in an alley and in a forest and in his own preparation nightmares for a month. Naruto put both hands on the barrier's exterior. The chakra crystal construction was dense, not permanent construct dense, not Gaara's sand dense, but substantial. The kind of seal work that a Jonin level or above barrier specialist put weeks into. It had multiple redundant anchor points distributed across the dome's surface, each one self-reinforcing, designed so that disrupting any single point caused the others to compensate and strengthen. He'd read about this. The grimoire had a section on distributed anchor constructs. He'd practiced with distributed systems, 3-point, 4-point arrays, working through them in sequence rather than simultaneously. This barrier looked like a 12-point array at minimum. 12 points. Sequential. 4 minutes of sustained engagement, maximum. He started from the base. The anti-magic moved through his palms into the barrier's surface and found the first anchor point, 50 centimeters to the right of his left hand, dense and self-reinforcing, currently pulling additional chakra from the adjacent points to compensate for the pressure he was applying. He sent a focus stream through the surface toward it, not the full surface field, just the stream. Targeted. The anchor point resisted, genuinely resisted, the seal work quality high enough to push back against the initial negation, and he held the stream steady and let the anti-magic work at the molecular level of the seal architecture, finding the specific chakra bond pattern and dissolving it strand by strand. The first anchor point went dark. The adjacent points compensated immediately, pulling chakra from the network, the barrier strengthening around the gap. Smart design. He moved to the second point. Inside the dome, Orochimaru had turned. He was watching Naruto through the barrier's wall with that same expression, the naturalist reading a new data point, the scientist watching an experiment progress. He said something to the Hokage that Naruto couldn't hear. The Hokage looked at Naruto through the crystal wall with the particular expression of someone who was simultaneously grateful and deeply, personally afraid of something, and those two feelings were aimed at the same source. Naruto met the Hokage's eyes and nodded. Then went back to the second anchor point. The Kyuubi spoke while he worked. There are 10 more after this one. At your current rate you'll breach the barrier in 3 minutes. 2.5, Naruto said. He was already at the third point. You don't have the capacity for what comes after the breach. Not with a month's worth of path, I have enough, Naruto said. And if I don't, you make up the difference. A very significant pause. That's not, Kyuubi. He dissolved the third anchor. We've been in this together since the forest. Stop pretending we haven't. The pause this time was shorter. Then, with the profound reluctance of an ancient destructive force accepting a working arrangement it had arrived at through pure logical necessity, 3 tails. That's what I can safely provide without destabilizing the seal. 2, Naruto said. Keep 1 in reserve. 2, the Kyuubi agreed, with the tone of someone who was going to deny this conversation ever happened. The anti-magic moved faster. He was reading the anchor point architecture now the way he'd learned to read everything the grimoire showed him, not consciously processing each step but letting the understanding flow directly into action, the negation depth responding to intent rather than instruction. Fourth point. Fifth. The barrier was pulling harder, the remaining anchors working at maximum compensation, the dome's surface crackling with the strain of a distributed system trying to hold on short-handed. Sixth. Seventh. Orochimaru had stopped watching the Hokage entirely. He was fully turned toward Naruto now, both hands at his sides, and the patience in his posture had been replaced by something operational. He was preparing. Using the time the barrier still stood to build whatever he was going to use the moment it didn't. Naruto dissolved the eighth anchor. The barrier fractured. Not completely, 4 points still holding, but visibly, crystalline cracks spreading from the gap zones, the dome no longer seamless. Through the cracks, sound came through. The Hokage's calm, low voice saying something. Orochimaru's reply, smooth and unhurried. Remarkable boy, Orochimaru was saying. Honestly, Sarutobi-sensei, I didn't account for this specific timeline. I thought I had another 10 minutes. You have considerably less, the Hokage said. Ninth anchor. 10th. The barrier shattered. Not dramatically, it cracked from multiple fracture points simultaneously and the dome came apart in large crystalline fragments that dissolved into chakra mist before hitting the platform, the way well-made seals dissolved when they failed rather than leaving physical debris. The roof of the tower was suddenly open to the sky and the noise of the city, burning in patches now. Naruto could see smoke columns rising from the eastern district, could hear the distant percussion of large-scale combat, came rushing in. Orochimaru stood on the roof of the tower. The Hokage stood 10 meters from him. And Naruto stood at the dome's perimeter with both arms running anti-magic at the maximum sustained level, the negation depth at full surface, the grimoire hot against his ribs. For a moment nobody moved. Then Orochimaru smiled at Naruto with all his teeth and said, 12-point distributed anchor barrier. Dismantled in 2 minutes and 19 seconds. He sounded genuinely pleased. I've been waiting a very long time to see what you could do at full commitment. Then you've been having a good day, Naruto said. I have, actually. Orochimaru's robes shifted, the Kazekage disguise dissolving, replaced by his own dark clothing, his own face, everything performed discarded. This was what happened when Orochimaru stopped performing. He didn't look more dangerous. He looked more honest, which was its own kind of danger. I want to explain something to you. Not as manipulation, I find you've developed sufficient perception to see through most manipulation, which is one of the things I appreciate about you. As honest information. Pass, Naruto said. The grimoire, Orochimaru said, anyway. Responds to the Kyuubi's chakra as an anchor because the scale of the Kyuubi's chakra is large enough to stabilize the anti-magic's power requirements. Standard human chakra systems can't provide that anchor. You can, because you're a Jinchuriki. He tilted his head. Do you know what happens if the anti-magic operates at maximum capacity without a sufficient anchor? It destabilizes, Naruto said. He'd read this. The grimoire had been explicit about it. More than that. Orochimaru's voice was gentle in the way that extremely intelligent people were gentle when they were about to say something they found interesting. At maximum output without an anchor, the anti-magic begins negating the host's own chakra system. Starting with the secondary pathways and working inward. The Kyuubi's seal is a chakra construct. Anti-magic at maximum without a sufficient anchor would eventually reach the seal. He paused. And then you'd have a very different kind of problem. The Hokage was very still. Naruto kept his eyes on Orochimaru. That's what you wanted, Naruto said. Not a question. That's what tonight was designed for, Orochimaru said pleasantly. The invasion creates conditions. Conditions require response. Response pushes you toward maximum output. At maximum output, without careful management, he spread his hands, the seal fails. I don't need to take the grimoire. I don't need to extract the Kyuubi. I simply need to create the right pressure and the physics do the work. He looked at the smoke rising over Konoha. The invasion was always secondary. You were the variable I came to test. So the village, the Hokage began. Will sustain damages proportional to the quality of its shinobi response, Orochimaru said, without looking away from Naruto. Which I expect to be adequate. I have no particular interest in Konoha's destruction tonight. Only in this. He gestured at Naruto with one graceful hand. The question of whether the anti-magic breaks the seal when pushed hard enough, or whether the boy has found a management method I haven't accounted for. Naruto looked at him for a long moment. You spent 11 years looking for the grimoire, he said. You figured out what it needed as an anchor. You waited for a Jinchuriki host to find it. He turned the logic over. But you couldn't use it yourself because you're not a Jinchuriki. So you needed it to be someone else. And then needed to engineer a situation where that someone else would be pushed to the limit, Orochimaru confirmed. Yes. You follow quickly. I'm not going to push to the limit, Naruto said. Aren't you? Orochimaru's eyes moved to the smoke. Your village is burning. Your people are fighting. Every instinct you have, is mine, Naruto said. Not yours. You don't get to use my instincts as a mechanism. Orochimaru looked at him. Something moved in the yellow eyes, not the warmth of the alley meeting, not the intellectual appreciation of the forest. Something older and more personal. You're 17 years old, he said quietly. 12, Naruto said. A beat of silence. 12, Orochimaru repeated. Something in his voice had changed. You're 12 years old and you just dismantled a 12-point barrier in 2 minutes and you're standing on a rooftop telling me that you understand my plan and you're going to decline to be part of it. He was quiet for a moment. I spent 30 years building toward this and you're 12 years old. Unlucky, Naruto said. Orochimaru's expression was unreadable for exactly 3 seconds. Then he moved. What came out of him wasn't a standard technique. It was everything at once, the full expression of what 30 years of research and forbidden technique acquisition produced when deployed without reservation. Multiple nature transformations firing simultaneously, the Kusanagi manifesting from his throat in a continuous extending blade, a snake summoning that bypassed the standard ritual and produced a construct of pure compressed chakra in the shape of something enormous, barrier seals deploying from the sleeves as autonomous microconstructs. The roof of the tower became a problem in every direction at once. Naruto took it. He didn't dodge. He dropped both arms wide, opened the negation depth to the maximum of what the month's training had built him toward, and let the anti-magic bloom outward from his body in the full surface field that Niji had described seeing in the preliminary. The black field expanded at running speed, 3 meters, 4, 5, and everything it touched that was chakra constructed came apart. The Kusanagi's technique reinforcement died and it became a metal sword. The summoned construct collapsed into dispersing chakra mist. The autonomous barrier seals hit the field and went dark one after another in a sequence that was almost rhythmic. What remained was the physical force of the impact, the snake construct's residual momentum hitting him as mass rather than technique, the Kusanagi as a blade rather than an enhanced weapon. The mass knocked him back 3 meters and the blade opened a cut along his left forearm, clean and deep, and he caught himself against the tower's parapet wall and held. Orochimaru was inside the 5-meter field radius. He'd moved through the expanding edge the moment it went out, before it reached him, because he'd watched Naruto's fights in the preliminary and the finals and he knew how fast the field expanded and he timed his forward movement to arrive inside the radius before the edge caught him. This was the difference between a 12-year-old and 30 years of experience. Orochimaru was standing inside the negation field, his external chakra enhancement stripped, his hand around Naruto's throat. Now, Orochimaru said quietly, very close, his yellow eyes level. Let's see what you do. The anti-magic at close range on Naruto's skin was stripping the external enhancements from Orochimaru's hands as fast as he could apply them. Touch-range anti-magic was where it was strongest and Orochimaru's grip was pure physical force right now, which was substantial but finite. Naruto had both hands free. He grabbed both of Orochimaru's wrists and pushed the negation current through the contact points at full intensity, and Orochimaru's face went through its second genuine surprise expression of their acquaintance. The fortress system again, that immense, decades-deep chakra architecture that the anti-magic had to work through rather than through. But this time Naruto wasn't trying to dismantle the whole thing. He'd learned from the forest. He was looking for something specific. The 5 elements seal. He'd felt it in the forest, present in Orochimaru's system, somewhere deep, the specific chakra signature of a 4-point construct designed to suppress another chakra system. It was down there, in the fortress, and the grimoire had spent a month showing him how to find specific structures inside complex architectures. He sent the negation current downward through the contact points like a needle rather than a flood, narrow, searching. Orochimaru's grip tightened. His free techniques were gone, but his physical strength was not inconsiderable, and Naruto's left arm was bleeding and the sustained maximum field was pulling at his pathways with the familiar warning strain of someone approaching their technical ceiling. "You're going to damage yourself," Orochimaru said. "The pathway strain, I know," Naruto said, and found the 5 elements seal. It was distinctive the way load-bearing structures were distinctive. Everything else in the fortress was Orochimaru's own work, his own chakra signature. The 5 elements seal had a different handwriting. It had been placed by Orochimaru, but the design was older, a borrowed architecture, and the anti-magic recognized the difference immediately and went for it with the specificity of something that had been waiting for this exact target. Orochimaru went still. The feeling of the negation current moving through the 5 elements seal's architecture must have been, Naruto couldn't imagine it exactly, but he could feel the reaction. Orochimaru's fortress chakra system, which had resisted every previous attempt, lurched. Not defensively. With something that might have been alarm. "Don't," Orochimaru said. It was the first time Naruto had heard that word in that voice. Not a command. Not a manipulation. Just, don't. "What happens if I dissolve it?" Naruto asked. "The technique reverts," Orochimaru said. "What I placed in Sasuke comes back. The curse mark. The cursed seal returns to its natural state without the 5 elements counter-suppression." At this proximity, his grip had become something different, less controlling, more, Naruto didn't have a word for it. At this proximity, if the seal overloads while the anti-magic is active in the environment, the interaction, he stopped. Would feed the anti-magic the Sasuke's chakra system as raw material, Naruto finished. He'd read the section on proximity effects. He understood what he was holding. Which would push the anti-magic past the anchor capacity of the Kyuubi's chakra. He met Orochimaru's eyes. "Which is what you wanted. Except now you're inside the field when it happens." The yellow eyes held his. "You've been very thorough," Orochimaru said. "I read a lot," Naruto said. One of the smoke columns to the east was getting bigger. From somewhere below and to the south, the unmistakable pressure wave of a very large summoning, the Shikaku's chakra, the Tanuki construct operating somewhere beyond the stadium wall, pushed through the air like a change in weather. Naruto felt it through the anti-magic's perception and felt Gaara's chakra somewhere inside it, diminished, the Jinchuriki fighting to stay present inside his own mind against the older force. He had 3 things happening simultaneously. He had his hands around Orochimaru's wrists with the negation current pointed at the 5 elements seal. He had the Kyuubi's two-tail support running in his system, holding his pathways stable at maximum sustained engagement. And he had the awareness of Gaara somewhere beyond the wall, the Shikaku rising, and he needed to be in 2 places and could only be in one. He made a choice. He released the 5 elements seal targeting. Pulled the negation current back from that depth and redirected it to the surface, turned the contact point transmission into a pure maximum intensity burst, not the pulse, the direct version, everything he had at the specific point of contact on Orochimaru's wrists. The goal wasn't the seal. The goal was the wrist contact's chakra network and the external structures running through it and the full 30 years deep fortress system taking the hardest hit it had yet received. Orochimaru's grip broke. Not from will, the chakra reinforcement was gone and the physical grip, stripped of enhancement, simply wasn't enough against the sudden full-force resistance. He stepped back and Naruto stepped back simultaneously and there were 2 meters between them and Orochimaru was holding both wrists with the expression of a man reading the damage report of something he'd spent decades building. "I'm going to Gaara," Naruto said. "And you're going to deal with my Hokage." He turned to the Hokage. The old man was standing with his pipe gone, his hands in the seal position that meant something enormous and probably final was coming. "Don't use the Reaper," Naruto said. The Hokage looked at him. "Please." He meant it. He meant it in the specific way you meant something when you were 12 years old and you had just barely started to understand what old people cost when they were gone. "There's another way." "Naruto," the Hokage began. 30 seconds, Naruto said. He was already at the parapet. "Keep him busy for 30 seconds. He jumped off the tower. The Shikaku was large. This was the first thing. He'd known intellectually that a full bijou manifestation was large, the descriptions in the grimoires section on Jinchuriki and contained systems had been thorough. But knowing and standing in the street outside the stadium wall looking up at a 3-story construct of compressed sand and malevolent ancient chakra were different categories of experience. He found Gaara at the base of the construct, half submerged in it the way a person was half submerged in water when the water was also made partly of them. The sand Jinchuriki was fighting it. Naruto could feel the specific quality of that fight in the chakra perception, Gaara's signature pressing against the Shikaku's signature with everything he had, trying to maintain the boundary between himself and the thing inside him. Gaara's sand armor, the permanent construct that Naruto had dissolved in the arena, wasn't there. It was rebuilding. Naruto had been right about that, the anchor points re-establishing slowly over time. But in the arena, the construct had been the primary barrier between Gaara and the Shikaku's pressure. Without it, the boundary was thinner. Naruto hit the Shikaku's base at a run and put both hands on the sand. This was not a 12-point barrier. This was not Gaara's personal construct. This was the chakra of a bijou that had been running for longer than the hidden villages existed, and the difference in scale was not incremental. The anti-magic hit the Shikaku's chakra construct like a match hitting a bonfire, real, present, functional, and completely insufficient to the scale of the task. So he didn't try to dismantle the whole thing. He found Gaara inside it. Found the specific signature, the person, not the bijou, the thread of individual identity running through the enormous mass of the Shikaku's presence. And he followed that thread inward with the negation current, using it not as a weapon but as a signal. As a contact point. The same thing he'd done in the arena, not addressing the construct's full architecture but finding the specific load-bearing element. In the arena the load-bearing element had been the anchor points. Here the load-bearing element was Gaara's presence. The one thing keeping the Shikaku from full expression was the Jinchuriki's consciousness, and consciousness ran on something that wasn't purely chakra but had a relationship with chakra, and anti-magic could find that relationship and follow it. "Gaara," Naruto said out loud, into the sand. The Shikaku's construct pushed back against his arms. The scale of it was crushing, not literally, the anti-magic's field was keeping the physical sand from compressing around him, but the chakra pressure was enormous, pushing against his system from every direction. The Kyuubi surged. Not aggressively. Not the red-gold flood that came when Naruto's life was in immediate danger. This was deliberate, the 2 tails they'd agreed on, running up through the system and pressing outward into the anti-magic's parallel layer, providing the anchor that the grimoires section on scale limitations had described, the Kyuubi's chakra acting as the ballast that kept the anti-magic from beginning to devour itself under bijou-level pressure. The 2 forces pushed outward together. Anti-magic and Kyuubi chakra, the 2 magnets wrong side out grinding between them converted by sheer scale and mutual necessity into something that worked like a third force, not either of them, but the pressure between them, directed outward, a spiral of negation and raw power that hit the Shikaku's construct at a level it hadn't been built to address. Devil's spiral, the grimoire said, in the wordless direct way. Anti-magic and bijou chakra in forced cooperation. The intersection of negation and excess. A state that cannot be maintained but while present is absolute. The Shikaku construct destabilized. Not completely. Not permanently. The bijou was too large and too old and too fundamentally present for anything Naruto could generate to simply end it. But the outer layers dissolved, the constructed extension of the physical sand falling away from whatever existed at the core, and in the gap that created, Gaara's signature became clear, not buried, not half-submerged. Present. Distinct. Gaara, Naruto said again. A beat of silence inside the spiraling forces. Then Gaara's voice, finding its way out of the Shikaku's presence the way a person found their way out of deep water, one movement at a time. It's loud. I know, Naruto said. I know what that's like. It won't, Gaara's voice cracked on the word. It won't be quiet. Ever. It's never, it gets quieter, Naruto said. Not quiet. Quieter. There's a difference. He pushed more of the devil's spiral outward, giving Gaara more space, the Shikaku's presence pushed back further from the center. You don't have to do it today. You just have to be here right now. That's enough. The spiral was costing everything. He could feel the pathway strain running toward structural now, not micro-tears, the warning of something deeper. The Kyuubi's anchor was holding but the two-tail level was at its limit, the agreement he and the Kyuubi had made straining at its boundary. 4 minutes was his ceiling. He was past 4 minutes. Yield to me, Naruto said. In the tournament sense. Just, let me have this one. A silence that had the texture of an enormous decision. Then the Shikaku's presence receded. Not banished, not sealed, it stepped back, the way the tide stepped back, temporarily, and by its own agency. Gaara's signature became fully distinct. The sand construct came down in an avalanche that the anti-magic field kept from burying them both, the inert grains falling around a 3-meter circle of clear ground. Gaara was on the ground. Exhausted in a way that went beyond physical. He looked up at Naruto and his eyes had the quality of someone who had just heard something for the first time that they'd been trying to hear their whole lives. Naruto let the devil's spiral go. Both forces retracted simultaneously, the Kyuubi's chakra pulling back to its baseline, the anti-magic drawing inward to working level. The negation depth settled. His arms dropped. He sat down next to Gaara because his legs made a strong case for it. That's going to hurt tomorrow, he said, mostly to himself. Gaara looked at the sky. The combat noise was still present but changing in quality, moving toward conclusion rather than escalation, the invasion's push cresting and beginning to recede as Konoha's response found its full weight. Your village, Gaara said. It'll hold. He said it with the same certainty he'd used all day. It always holds. My village sent me here to, I know what they sent you here to do. He looked at Gaara. And you didn't do it. You yielded in the tournament. You yielded to me again just now. He paused. That's 2 choices that were yours. That's 2 choices that nobody made for you. Gaara was quiet for a very long time. Long enough that the combat noise had dropped considerably by the time he spoke. My sand, he said. In the arena. When you dissolved it, he stopped. What? For a moment it was quiet. The pale green eyes moved to Naruto. When the sand was gone. Before I understood what happened. For a moment the Shikaku couldn't reach me because the construct was gone and the pathways were, he stopped again. Quiet. Naruto looked at him. At the exhausted face, the years of weight in it, the single tear track in the sand dust on his cheek that Gaara almost certainly didn't know was there. I'll teach you to do that yourself, he said. Not the same way, you don't have anti-magic. But there are methods. Ways to create that space without needing someone else to take the construct down. He hadn't read this in the grimoire. He just knew it was true in the same way he knew other things were true, through certainty of self, through the conviction that things were solvable if you stayed with them. When this is over. Gaara looked at him for a moment longer. Then looked back at the sky. When this is over, he said. Like a commitment. The eastern tower's roof was visible from the street. Naruto looked up at it as he walked back, giving his legs time to confirm they were in fact still functional. The platform was quiet, no combat signatures, no flaring chakra. He couldn't tell what had happened up there without getting closer. He started toward it and met Kakashi at the base of the tower stairs, coming down, his visible eye doing the detailed assessment thing. The Hokage? Naruto said immediately. Alive, Kakashi said. Shaken. Orochimaru is gone, retreated when the invasion's momentum broke. He stopped and looked at Naruto with full attention. What did you do to him? His chakra signature when he left was irregular. The kind of irregular that our censor Nin are going to be writing reports about for months. I hit the fortress system as hard as I could, Naruto said. At wrist contact range. Both hands, maximum intensity. He looked at his own hands. The cut on his left forearm had closed, the Kyuubi's passive healing, running automatically in the aftermath. I don't know how long it'll take him to rebuild what I disrupted. Months, Kakashi said. At minimum. He was quiet for a moment. He'll come back differently. I know. Naruto looked up at the tower. Is the Hokage? I asked him not to use the Reaper. He didn't. Kakashi's voice had something in it that wasn't his usual equanimity. Something warm. He bought 30 seconds and then the fight ended because you came back. A pause. You asked an S-rank missing Nin to wait 30 seconds so you could help a Sanjin Shiriki, then came back to close the fight. It was relevant, Naruto said. Kakashi was quiet for a moment. Then, very simply, yes. It was. Konoha at 2 in the morning after an invasion had a specific quality that Naruto had never experienced before and was not going to forget. Fires controlled to embers. Streets full of the purposeful movement of recovery rather than the panicked movement of attack. Medics and jonin and civilians working with the particular cooperative efficiency of a village that knew how to survive things. The Hokage had made his rounds personally. Naruto had seen him from a distance, older looking than he'd been yesterday, moving with the weight of what had almost happened and didn't. Team 7 found each other in the courtyard of the hospital, which was where everyone who'd been in the arena district ended up eventually. Sakura had an arm in a sling. She waved off the immediate concern with the practiced authority of a person who'd already assessed her own injury and decided it was manageable. Sasuke was intact in the way that Sasuke was always intact, which was to say physically fine and processing something privately at high speed. They didn't say much. They sat in the courtyard with the night above them and the hospital's lights warm behind them and the sound of the village doing what it did. After a while Sasuke said, "He was here for you." He was here for the grimoire, Naruto said. And for the Kyuubi's seal. Same thing, ultimately. He planted the cursed seal on me as a secondary objective. Secondary, Naruto confirmed. Sasuke was quiet. You stepped in front of me in the forest, he said. In the preliminary, when Orochimaru, we already talked about this. I didn't say anything then. Naruto looked at him. What do you want to say now? Sasuke looked at his hands. At the spot on his neck where the cursed seal's initial application had been, now quiet, the 5-element suppression still intact. In the Uchiha compound, when I was a child, my father used to say that power without purpose was just violence. He said it flatly, the way he said things that cost him something. He said the Uchiha clan's purpose was the protection of Konoha. That was the whole point. He was quiet for a moment. I've spent 3 years telling myself that my purpose was revenge. And watching you today, he stopped. Naruto waited. Watching you today I kept thinking that my father would have respected you more than me, Sasuke said. Simple. Devastating. The kind of honesty that only came out at 2 in the morning after an invasion. And that the gap between what I'm building toward and what you're building toward is, he didn't finish it. You're 12, Naruto said. Neither of us knows what we're building toward. You seem like you know. I know what I want, Naruto said. That's different. He looked at the hospital lights. I want to be Hokage. I want this village to be safe. I want people in it to know it's safe. Including you. He glanced at Sasuke. Whatever you're reckoning with, the stuff you've been working through this whole month, take your time. It's fine. I'm not going anywhere. Sasuke looked at him. The multi-layered expression, the fast-moving weather behind the dark eyes, settled into something clearer. Not warm exactly, Sasuke ran at a temperature that warm was too simple a word for. But present. Real. You're genuinely irritating, Sasuke said. I know, Naruto said, and meant something entirely different by it. Sakura looked between them from her good arm's side and exhaled the exhale of someone who had been watching two complicated people have a complicated relationship for a year and was glad to see it land somewhere better than the last time she checked. She leaned her head back against the hospital wall and looked at the sky. I need someone to explain to me, she said, why every major event in our lives ends with us sitting somewhere in the dark talking about our feelings. Because we're 12, Naruto said. That's going to be your answer to everything from now on, isn't it? Probably for the next few years. She laughed. Genuinely laughed, which was the sound the night had been waiting for, and the courtyard held it. Later, when Sakura had been admitted for overnight observation on the arm and Sasuke had gone back to the Uchiha compound with the particular walk of someone who had a lot to think about and intended to think it all the way through before morning, Naruto sat alone on the hospital's roof and opened the grimoire. The pages moved the way they always moved, settling, reorganizing, the night cycle processing running, new sections rising to the surface as old ones completed. He let it run and looked out over Konoha instead of at the pages. The smoke columns were gone now. The lights of the village moved in the normal patterns of a city at rest, interrupted here and there by the emergency rhythm of recovery work. It looked like itself. Damaged, ongoing, entirely itself. He looked at his hands. Left arm closed scar from the Kusanagi. Right hand steady, the anti-magic at rest in the parallel layer, the negation depth quiet and present and integrated in a way it hadn't been 3 weeks ago when he'd come up from underground with a black book and very little understanding. The Kyuubi's chakra was quiet too, genuinely quiet, not the strategic quiet of something waiting to speak, but the quiet of something that had burned significant energy and was replenishing. He could feel it resting the way he could feel his own muscles resting after hard use. You know he'll come back, the Kyuubi said, eventually. Yeah. With adjustments. With new research. With a specific solution to the fortress disruption problem. Yeah. Are you concerned? Naruto thought about it. Not tonight, he said. When? When it's relevant. He looked at the grimoire's pages moving in the dark. He said I'd kill myself before I mastered it. He said that in the forest. Before the barrier. Before the devil's spiral. What do you think he'd say now? The Kyuubi was quiet for a long moment. Then, I think he'd revise his timeline considerably. Naruto looked at the city. At the thing he was going to protect, the thing he was going to lead, the thing that had been afraid of him and ignored him and was now, somewhere in the stands and the hospital waiting rooms and the recovery work streets, beginning the slow process of looking at him differently. Not because he'd performed for them. Because he'd been what he was, and the distance between what people expected of Naruto Uzumaki and what Naruto Uzumaki actually was had finally become impossible to ignore. He thought about Niji's yielding, clean and certain. About Gaara's pale green eyes on the sky saying when this is over like a promise to himself. About Orochimaru's voice saying don't with a sincerity that had surprised him more than anything else in the day. About Sasuke in the courtyard saying his father would have respected Naruto more than him, which was the most honest thing Sasuke had ever said to him, which meant it was going to take a while to understand fully. He thought about the moment on the tower roof when the barrier shattered and the city opened up and Orochimaru looked at him and revised his assessment of what a 12-year-old could be. He thought about standing in that antechamber underground 3 weeks ago, picking up a black book that had been waiting for an anchor large enough to hold it. The grimoire's pages settled. The night cycle completed. The book went still in his lap, warm and quiet, a thing that had found its host and was done needing to announce itself. Naruto closed it. Put his hand flat on the cover. Felt the negation depth pulse once, steady, deep, the heartbeat of a force that had been waiting longer than he'd been alive and was willing to wait longer still. "I know," he said. "We've got time." He looked at the village below, at the lights and the work and the ongoing imperfect extraordinary fact of 10,000 lives going on inside these walls, and felt the thing he always felt when he looked at it, that pull in the chest that wasn't a jutsu and wasn't a grimoire and wasn't a bijou, that was just his, that had always been just his. He stood up. The morning was coming. The exams weren't finished. Orochimaru was somewhere revising his calculations. The Kyuubi was resting and would wake up with opinions. The grimoire had 17 unread sections and was patient about them. He had work to do. He jumped off the roof and landed in the street below and walked home through the recovering city, the grimoire under his arm, his shadow long behind him in the early light.